Hello, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to today's grant writing workshop for early to mid-career researchers. This webinar is brought to you by the Wellcome Trust-funded Pathogen Variants Network and the Global Health Network from the University of Oxford. My name's Katrina Lawson. I'll be chairing the webinar today. I'm a senior grant manager and communications manager as well. I work for the University of Oxford at Oxford University Clinical Research Unit based in Vietnam. So I'll be chairing today's session, and we have a couple of housekeeping things for people to be aware of before we begin. So firstly, this session is being recorded. The recording will be shared in the coming weeks on the Global Health Network platform, so you can review and share the materials. These materials can be found using the link that's just been shared in the chat. Please use the chat feature for introductions or to report any technical issues you might be experiencing. The Global Health Network team are here and they're going to assist with those. To interact with the panel, please use the Q&A feature. That's where you can put your questions and comments, and you can do that anonymously if you want to as well. Due to the number of participants we have, your video, microphone, and the option to raise your hand have all been disabled. We have dedicated a time allocated for Q&As at the end of the session, so we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. We'll also be checking questions in the Q&A, and there may be some answers coming through live as well. We don't have time for all your questions. We will compile them and address them after the session. Okay. So this workshop includes expert-led presentations and discussions on finding funding opportunities, aligning projects with funder priorities, crafting strong proposals and budgets, and enhancing collaboration and community engagement. Just a quick note on the agenda for what it's going to be like today. So there's going to be a round of introductions. Then all the speakers will present on the subjects that are in the agenda that you can see on the screen now. And then at the end, we have a 1-hour Q&A session where we'll tackle some of the questions, as many as we can, that pop up in the Q&A on the Zoom chat thing, the Q&A on Zoom. So now let's begin the program for today. Firstly, I'm delighted to be joined by, well, a lot of people. So we've got 1,000 people on the Zoom today. And at the same time, we're live streaming via YouTube. So there's many, many more people beyond this. We had more than 8,000 people register. And so the team is showing you on screen right now this map showing that people are coming from everywhere. And we're really excited to have you here. Today, we're going to be seeing some presentations from a number of experts. To start with, we have Dr. Sylvie Querney. She is a clinical projects lead. She is a public health expert with a PhD and dual master's degrees, specializing in HIV and TB programs across Africa. And she's a senior lecturer at the University of Yaoundé, I hope I said that correctly, and founder of Clear Inc., which strengthens health and research systems in resource-limited settings. This will be a pre-recorded setting. We also have presentations from Professor Isabella Oya, Dr. Evelyn Kestelin, myself, Sheikha Salom Mohammed, and Dr. Anna Selvan. I will give everybody's bios before they present, just so that you can remember which person was which. I'd like to move now to the presentation section, and we can show you the first presentation from Dr. Sylvie Querney.
We really could just restart that so that we can start again with the sound. Sorry, we'll stop again and just and restart.
Process is quite. Hello, my name is Sylvie Kweti, and I will be talking about understanding the grant landscape in 2025, which is where we are. We all know that things have changed. We all know that things have changed quite a bit, particularly in this year. The grant process is quite different from what we're used to. So let's get into it. In my presentation, I will be talking about the application process from finish to start. I will be talking about the different types of funders and funding opportunities out there. I won't be talking about all of them, but some of them. I will talk about the grant review criteria, and we'll also talk a little bit about some trends and some tips. So why do we do this anyway? Why bother? We are researchers, and as researchers, we need to do research. And what do we need to do research? We need finances, financial resources. That's what we need. And in order to acquire financial resources, many of us have to apply for competitive grants. So what is the actual purpose of a grant proposal? A grant proposal's function is to persuade the reviewers that your research idea is worth funding. It can be worth funding because of its conceptual innovation, because of the methodological rigor that you are actually using to get to your research questions or to answer your research questions. And your grant can also be worth funding by how rich and substantive the content is. Altogether, all these three ideas and many other aspects to your grant will make your grant proposal worth funding. So your role as a researcher is to actually persuade and convince the reviewers that you deserve the funding that they're out to give. Now, here's one tip. A successful proposal is written with the eye to the perspective of the reviewer. So the reviewer, you have to put yourself in the reviewer's shoes. If you were the reviewer, what type of information do you want to see in the grant that you are reviewing? So as you're writing, just remember that. So what's the actual point of a grant proposal? The grant proposal convinces an agency, this is a funding agency, of the importance of your project idea and your ability to carry it out. So it's not only how scientific the idea is or the technical aspect of it and how much you master the technical aspect of it, but are you as a researcher or your research team actually able to carry out this research project from beginning to end? The grant proposal gives the funding agency a reason to trust you as the researcher with highly coveted resources, especially for us African researchers. There is not as much in terms of funding. I mean, the sheer amount of money that is available to us is quite little, and there's so many of us that compete for the same funding. Now, when you are competing, you want to win. Of course, you want to win. So the onus is on you, the researcher, to give the funding agency, to give the reviewer a reason to trust you with this funding that is so difficult to come by. So here's a scheme of a typical process of writing the proposal, and I'll go through this somewhat step by step. So you see the activities on top, which are yellow, and then the activities on the bottom, which are blue. The ones on top is the ones that you actually would go through in terms of gathering the information, developing the concept, writing the proposal, submitting the proposal. So once you submit the proposal, things can go two ways. Either you are awarded, which is what we're talking about, and you're not. If you're not awarded, I just want to spend just a minute or a few seconds talking about when you're not awarded. If you write a proposal, you submit it, and you don't receive the funding, remember that not all is lost. Keep your proposal. I actually have a bank of proposals that I can always go back to if there's a new request for proposal that is similar. So remember that just because you're not awarded funds, that doesn't mean that all is lost. Here's a tip. Please start early. Keep an eye out for proposals. I do not commit to writing proposals in less than 2 weeks. And 2 weeks is actually too short. I'd actually give myself about 3 months, but we'll go through that. So begin early, begin thinking about the topic well in advance. So what do you actually need at the beginning? Once you see a call for proposal, a request for proposal out there, start thinking about gathering the information. How will you gather the information? Start thinking about your concept, reviewing the literature, see what is out there. Start thinking about the program, the actual funding agency. What is their mission? And does their mission align with your proposed idea? Start early thinking about expenses, because this is information that is quite difficult. If you have a finance department that has experience with budgeting, grant proposal, that is wonderful. If you don't have experience with that in your team, you have to go get the experience, because this is not an easy part. So next, you start developing your concept. You have to think about your main research aims, your main researchable questions, and be very sure that this is the direction that you want to go into. Remember that you're being judged, you're being evaluated. So once you actually finish with the groundwork and you actually start writing, the first thing I do is write an outline. I don't just go straight into, for example, writing the background, writing the rationale, writing the introduction. I first start with bullet points, and writing an outline. And then with my team, we review the outline. Remember that when you're writing, of course, we are scientists. We are Dr. So-and-so, PhD this, MD that, Professor this, Professor Emeritus that. Yes, we are smart. We would not be where we are today if we're not smart. But when you're writing the proposal, you want to be clear. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how complex you want to present your idea. If you're not clear, nobody will understand your proposal. What I actually do in terms of formatting, I hire, and I usually pay, maybe sometimes I pay $200, $400. I pay for a professional editor to go through my proposal after I'm finished with it, because a professional editor would actually take the time, and they have the skills to edit and go through the formatting. Formatting is so important. Remember that you have to follow the guidelines of the funding agency. So these days, most funding agencies use a platform where you submit a proposal, and the platforms will have the exact format that they want. So for example, if they say that they want, let's say 800 words for the introduction, you cannot go past 800 words. You have to be very careful because many, and this has happened to me particularly, many grant proposals get disqualified just on the administrative aspect of things because it didn't respect the guidelines. For example, if they said that, and this has happened to me where I didn't read the instructions correctly, I needed a European partner in my team, and then I put together a team, did not have the European partner, automatically disqualified. So remember that it's extremely important to follow the guideline and always aim for clarity. Avoid the jargon, just avoid it. You want to be clear. A layperson should be able to read your proposal and be able to understand it. So you'll have written your proposal, it's nice, it's been reviewed, it's time to submit. Remember, if the funding agency requires a cover letter, go ahead and give them a cover letter, just 1 page. Remember to respect the submission date. Me, when I'm in Africa, with the internet connection being unsteady, I don't submit the day of. I would actually submit either a day or 2 before because I don't want any problems when I'm submitting. So here's a typical process for a grant proposal review. This is from the time you actually submitted. The funding agencies typically, this differs from agency to agency, but typically they could take about 3 to 5 months just to review your proposal. And sometimes they will send you back comments. When they do send you back comments, they're expecting you to answer their comments. Sometimes there can be a little bit of back and forth. Now, not all of them will send you back comments. Sometimes they will just reject it right out. But from the time you write and from the time they send you comments, the back and forth of the comments, you could be up to 5, 6, 7 months. And then a decision is made on whether or not you are awarded the funding. Now, remember, even once you receive that email, we are pleased to inform you that, don't we all love that? We love that. Once you receive that email, it's great news, but there can still be a little bit of back and forth. Sometimes a month to 3 months of back and forth, and the back and forth after the grant has been awarded usually also involves negotiating contracts because there are contract terms once your grant proposal has been awarded. So let's talk about different funding agencies. There are so many different types of funding agencies out there. The key to developing a sustainable research program is to really understand all those different funding agencies. Remember, they are the ones who are sending out requests for proposals. So they really want to give you the money. They want your grant to be funded. They wanted to give you the money. That's their main objectives, is to give a researcher or many researchers the funding. So remember, they want to fund the grant. Now that they want to fund your grant, that is in your hands. So there's different funding agencies. The first group that I will talk about is the multilateral and international agencies. Now, these are the ones that are for global health, like WHO, the World Bank, and those type of organizations. And then you have your bilateral donors. These are usually the government aid organizations, such as in the US, you have the USAID. Let's not get into how complicated USAID got this year, but they still do fund, and I'm expecting that things will likely change in the future. And then you have other governments, like in the UK, you have the UK government, you have the European Union itself that also funds. You have, GIZ from Germany. There's different of these bilateral donors. And then you have the philanthropic foundations. To tell you the truth, these are my preference because they're usually not as strict as the government institutions. The philanthropic foundations are, for example, the Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, CHI, the MasterCard foundations, and they are actually quite different. And like I mentioned before, they're a little bit more relaxed in terms of administering their funding than the different government organizations. And then so you have these regional and Pan-African initiatives like the African Academy of Science, EDCTP. EDCTP is actually European and developing countries clinical trial partnerships. So you have the African institution merging with European institutions. You have the African Union, the African CDC, the WHO TDR, have benefited also from grants from them. And then you have this academic and research partnerships. Now, these are universities and research institutions that collaborate across continents. And typically, they get funded as a consortium of university, and then they provide that funding to PhDs, to clinical research networks. And, some of them are like the Fogarty programs, there's different partnership for clinical research where different universities get together and actually have funding to dispense for research. Okay, so let's talk about grant review criteria. There's 6 of them, and I'm going to go through one by one. The first one that the reviewer will look at is impact. What is the actually impact? What is the bank that you are expecting to produce with your research idea? What difference will it make? Will your research idea be likely to exert a sustained and powerful influence on your research field? The next one is significance. That's the question that reviewers would usually say, so what? So you have this research idea, so what? Why is it important? Why does it matter? What is it significant? Are you talking about addressing an important problem or a critical barrier that is needed to progress in your particular field? So that's what we mean by significance. Then you have the investigators, the actually research team. Does the research team have the experience, the breadth, and the depth of experience necessary to carry out the research idea that is being proposed? This is very important to grant funding agencies. Also, they look at your approach. Now, this is the technical aspect. This is actually where they will actually look at your technical mastery of your craft. Do you technically know what you're doing? Are you using the correct equipment? Are you using the correct methods in order to answer the research questions that you approach? And then they look at your environment. So we know we work within African institutions. What the grant agency wants to know is, does your institution actually allow for this type of research to get done? Do they actually contribute the scientific environment that you work in? Does it actually contribute to the probability of success? Do you have the support that is necessary? Does the institution have a history in terms of managing the types of grant that you are requesting? So these are the review criteria that the reviewers look at. Also, they look at the budget. Now, if your budget is not adequate, that tells the reviewer that you don't know what you're doing. Meaning that if your budget is too small or too large, that tells the reviewer that you don't know what you're doing. Same for timeline. If the timeline is too small or the timeline is too large, that tells the reviewer that you not know what you're doing. So don't sleep on budget and timelines. Even though this is not the technical aspect of things, it's a very, very critical review criteria that will determine whether or not you get funded. Oh, wow. I'm actually a little bit ahead of time. So just remember that in the end, when you're writing a grant proposal, write it with the perspective of the reviewer. Write it with the perspective of the reviewer. What does if you were the reviewer, what would you want to see? And they want to fund the research. So you just have to make sure that your particular grant proposal is competitive enough. And I know it's difficult, but remember, even if your grant proposal is not funded, keep it. Have it enter into your proposal bank, and then who knows, you might just be able to answer it. I mean, to use it at a later time. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you to Dr. Sylvie Coini for that really interesting presentation. I believe that she's hoping to join us later for the Q&A session. So if you stick around and you have a question for her, you may be able to see, type that question in live later on. I personally really like the advice that funders want to say yes. They're looking for a project to fund. They're looking to say yes to you. So your job as an applicant is to give them a reason to say yes to you. Our next presenter is Professor Isabella Oyer, who is Professor of Molecular Epidemiology at University of Oxford Kemry Wellcome Trust Research Programme. Professor Oyer is the head of the Biosciences Department at Kemry Wellcome Trust Research Programme. Her research work focuses on malaria molecular surveillance in Kenya, and she also leads and coordinates regional COVID-19 genomic and immunological surveillance efforts in the East Africa region. Dr. Oyer, would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. Just checking you can hear me as I show.
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Okay, and hope that's visible.
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you for the introduction, and thanks as well to the Global Health Network for allowing me to be part of this workshop. So my task over the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes is to take you through some writing skills as you think about developing that grant or proposal, and to think about the different components. So I'll pick up a bit from where Sylvia had left off. So I think I'll just start by reminding us all why it's important to write well. We're all research scientists, and essentially our work is to write what we do. First to write to get funded, but also to write to tell others about the work we've been doing. So presenting your research findings is also a way of communicating it. And are we sure we're doing that well? For some, depending on your stage in career, you'd be writing a thesis, but that's all the build up to writing publications or putting together a grant. So if you think of your research career progression as part of that process, of course, for publication, because that gets our work recognized and we're able to share. And we do get peer reviewed, whether it's for the publication or peer reviewed, even when you're writing your grant application. And so for this particular workshop, it's all about writing the grant to get the money. But maybe I'll just start by saying that writing is an art, so it requires a lot of practice and a lot of doing it over and over again, and ensuring that you have your own internal peer review process as well before going to the funder or even the peer reviewers who will look at your publication. So it's important also to think about writing style. People have different writing styles, but just some basic ones that if we can get these locked out and done and dusted before you even thinking about presenting your idea, it allows people to then just focus on your science. It's very difficult when somebody's reading your work to see spelling mistakes or grammatical errors, especially in this day and age where you've got all the AI tools that help you pick up a spelling mistake or some grammar errors. I think as Sylvia said as well, just really meeting the guidelines, the formatting guidelines of the proposal or the call that's been put out for funding. And then expressing yourself in the I format. I know usually when we're writing, we're saying we did this, but here it's about you who's wanting to do this big, bold idea. How do you intend to do it? So saying what I will do for the project or for the proposal. We do have sometimes tendencies to tell a lot of stories, but Sylvia did mention there's a word limit. So it's about simply presenting the facts and getting to them coherently, but quite quickly as well, because your word limits are quite tight. But at the same time, please remember that it's about telling a compelling story. Or if you're a sales agent, really thinking about yourself as thinking about your project as a sales pitch. So have you sold it to the best of your ability using a compelling story? But that story is obviously scientifically sound and based on scientific evidence. So again, you can also think about your choice of words as you think about writing the grant application. So I've just put there stamp like 3,500 words. That's an example of some of the Wellcome Trust applications. So the word limit is not massive. And so you've really got to get the whole idea from the background to the rationale, the objectives, and the justification, and what you're going to do, which is the methods in the 3,500 words, and emphasize why it's important. So really thinking about the words you will use and your sentence structure will be important. So just examples of what we do in science writing is we're examining, we're analyzing, and then we're drawing conclusions and ensuring as well that you have clearly stating your hypothesis. What are you trying to examine? If that really needs to be clear, when some example from my mentor was, what's the big question? What's the big question you're trying to answer? If that doesn't come across clearly, then you've not sold your idea. So ensuring that once you've written, you can share it with your peers and ask them, what is it I'm trying to say here? Or can you get the big idea that I would like to sell to a grant, to the person who's offering the grant, for instance. So just ensuring you have the clear question. And so your word choice can make the difference between a good and a great, I say paper or a great grant. So short, it's sharp, and it has clear sentences that can make sense. So short sentences are actually quite powerful compared to long, convoluted ones. So just some examples of words to avoid of the A to W. Just being careful about, getting excited with your work or your great idea. Things like accurate estimate is not the right way to say it. Is probably reliable estimate, because remember, these are all based on hypotheses and tests. Potentially the differences between saying something was carried out vis-a-vis conducted or performed, or something was studied, and thinking about words. So during the course of is quite long. You could just say during or in the process. We have these tendency of saying something was, how do you feel? But as you think about science, it's not about feeling, but potentially ensuring that you leave an idea behind, or a scientific evidence or point within your writing. And just connecting, and we do this when we speak, but ensuring that when we're writing, it's clearer. So you can't use two conjunctions, however, because, however, since, just for clarity. And then thinking about whether something is partially, partly, proportion. So just really thinking about the words you're using. And sometimes people tend to confuse varying, various, different, differing, the same thing, but they do mean different things. So being clear about your sentences and the words you're using to ensure they've got lots of clarity. Those are just some specific examples. Of course, there are many more. But the idea really is, as you write, go back and read that sentence and counter check. It has delivered the point in a simple way. So I'm not one to talk about writing clear English, but it's saves you time if you get it right. And that's why I said it's an art. It requires a lot of practice, and it requires also people being willing to have somebody read through their work and be really critical of it. It's better to get that done earlier before you go and submit the application. So concise. Does the sentence say what you want it to say? Oh, because you have something in your mind, you've written down, you think, yeah, it says what I wanted to say. But if somebody else would read it and say, actually, it's not clear, it doesn't make any sense. So that sort of feedback is very useful when you're thinking about the clarity of your writing. Usually when you start writing, which is a good way to do it, is just put your ideas down on paper first. So that would come across as how you would speak. Maybe when you're explaining something to somebody. But then you realize you have lots of these repetitive words you've used in the sentence, which then break down or dilute what you're trying to say. So ensuring you're not repetitive, you remove excessive ands, that's, and therefore, things that we are comfort zone when speaking. The other thing is, because you've written this version down, the first draft, you'll find again that it's either repetitive or you've gone on and on and on and you've not necessarily said anything. So again, going back to check your writing to ensure there's a clear message coming across in a few number of sentences as possible. And once you've written a sentence, critique yourself and say, is there a better way of saying it? Is there a clearer way of saying it? Ensuring your punctuation and commas, etc., are in the right place. And like I said, there's a difference between the spoken English and written English. So ensuring that your written English has lots of clarity in it, as opposed to some repetitive terms or your verbal spoken English. Just an example I've noted when reading people's work, just abbreviations and how those are used. Once you've introduced them at the beginning of the introduction, you just stick with the abbreviation for the rest of the document without keep repeating that, like DNA, you write it deoxyribonucleic acid, and then write DNA, and then later, 2 paragraphs down the line, you're introducing it again. So just being careful of those things. One, you don't have the space because you don't have the words. So just ensuring you're really being clear about these little things, but they do have a big impact on your writing. So as I mentioned, it's about telling a compelling story, and there's a thread to that story, and all the pieces need to stick to that thread. So once you've decided what that question is, what your big proposal is, what the big idea is, everything has to stick to that story so that the thread is continuous. So the background, or the rationale, or background or introduction, and then your rationale, which is also your justification, the objectives, the methods. If you've involved the community in that discussion to formulate your ideas, your analytical plan, the outcomes, any data management, your deliverables or milestones, ethics around the work, whether you need to get ethics for it or thinking about ethics around it, your timelines and your budget, all need to stick to this story that that's being said, so that there's a coherent piece to develop that grant application. So processing time, I've been there a year, because sometimes for some grants, you have to start very early. And I think that sticks to Sylvia's point that you'll have ideas. They may not get funded, but don't throw them away because they're in the bank of ideas. Obviously, that reduces some of the processing time. But it does mean that to get a really good grant application, you've got to give yourself time so that you can have back and forth conversations with various people, whether they're mentors, supervisors, or your peers, to give you enough time to develop this thread. As you can see, there are very many different elements to it. Although most of the time you'll spend within sort of the background, well, not meeting the background, but your rational objectives and then your methods. The background is about putting your idea in the context of the literature. Sorry, let me just put these all up. Okay, so this is some writing I took from one of my students. I did get approval to share. But I just highlight in red where some of the errors are. So for instance, in the first one with the circle, you can see there's a grammatical area. It's not a area, it's an area. So just ensuring those corrections are done. There's one here, diagnostic evaluation study, which aimed at evaluating. So you can see a bit of repetition there, evaluation, evaluating. but one of the ones I did highlight is which aimed at evaluating. You can simply say which evaluated. Again, just thinking around how you make your writing concise. And then this other one I circled, while working on a set of possible hypotheses, this study, blah, blah, blah. Again, that while working on a set of hypotheses can be removed and your sentence will still make sense, but it'll be clearer and more concise. And then the last one is just, if you look at it, it's just a really long sentence. I'm not going to read it, but as you can see, when you take a quick glance at it, there are no full stops. So this could be split into something shorter. So it's a punchier and a bit more powerful when you're trying to put forward an idea. I do have a second set of examples. This one is the exact same sentence, but just to look at the first box, the last sentence, the first sentence, sorry. The sentence ends, methods of control is important as ever, but you'll see in the second box, methods of control is very important. So again, it's just how you saying it, and is there a better way of saying it? So in this third box, you can again read the sentence, but you can see the error and examples of. So just plural, it should be an example of. And then this last one, again, a long sentence where a punctuation mark was forgotten. And here, carrying out an exhaustive analysis. There were some of those examples I gave where can you really do an exhaustive analysis of something? So it's just really thinking about what am I saying? Does that make any sense? So a bit of focus on the guidelines. Sylvia did mention this. It's important to understand the call you're applying for so that you can pitch your writing appropriately. You need to know what are the funder asking for in the call. Is it a specific pathogen they're looking at? Is it only a group of pathogens? So you can, again, just target your writing appropriately. Or if you had an idea, you can modify it to fit the call. Again, read it in detail and make notes and highlight all the sections of the application that are required to complete the application. Sylvia again gave you an example of needing a collaborator from Europe. Sometimes you need supporting letters. It's good to follow up on these things early. The other point to mention here, because it's on the writing, is there any format to the writing? Is there a particular font they want to use, the size, the maximum word count? Is there structure to how they want you to break the writing down? And you can include things like page numbers and start the submission, at least 24 hours before. Again, Sylvia mentioned that if you're in sort of the African setting where network is an issue, you don't want to be caught out. So I'll move then to the introduction. It's just thinking about the background to the work. So you will have a specific question in mind and you need to put the literature behind it. And you have to relate that literature to your work and how it leads to your rationale, the research question, and objectives of the study. So you start broad, narrow down the topic, come down your hypothesis and the purpose of the study, and then think about the impact. So length can vary, I won't talk about that, but essentially your introduction is to set the scene. Present the problem the research will address. Why is it important? How does it apply to the larger field of research? Clearly state that hypothesis, and you can pick up any relevant studies that will support your work. Again, you don't need the full history, you just need the relevant studies. Remember that you need to provide the information required to understand your question. So you really need to summarize the problem to be addressed and give the background that's relevant again to that topic and any of the previous research that has been done. You don't have to go too far back, but generally what's maybe 2 to 3 years has been developed in that field. Sometimes it's helpful to give some very historical context, but quite briefly. And then explain what you intend to address, the why and the how. And remember to touch on all the important concepts to put your work into context so people are not struggling. What is this person talking about? I know you don't have very many words, but ensure that the important concepts are there so that the question can be understood. So at the end of the introduction or background section, think about a small paragraph or a couple of sentences that will state it quite clearly so that you can lead easily into the objectives. This is quite long, but it's essentially just really thinking about the topic we're talking about on drug resistance and then a particular genetic marker and a particular mutation. So really just giving the main highlights in 3 sentences. You talk about the gene, the mutation, and then the importance of it and maybe where the gap is. So this repeats kind of what I've just said, examining what the grant focuses on, the problem and the background, and discussing it in a narrow topic. But remember, you need this clear statement or hypothesis. It's also important to put the work in context, so the motivation for the research. Why should people care? Why is it important? Remember, you need to sell that idea to everyone else. You may think it's important, but you need to convince others that it is. So this is an example from the mutation for chloroquine resistance in malaria, just telling people why it's important to understand this landscape for these drug resistance mutations in malaria. That's the example given there. So from there, once you've given the background, you can then get on to thinking about your goals or objectives, which in my mind are the same thing, but we generally write the main objective and then the specific objectives. And it's essentially the big question on what you're trying to solve. And you have to think of your objectives as being SMART, either specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And remember, it needs to be feasible, and the way you write them, they could be connected or incremental. So here's some examples of one grant that I wrote. So these were the first 3 objectives. I'll just take number 1 as example: to determine the transmission networks of dengue and chikungunya virus outbreaks and the potential of these rapidly evolving viruses to escape host immunity and evade vaccination and vector control. So that was the first version. But in the next iteration, which is in this example, just look at specific objective 2. It was then changed to determine the transmission networks of chikungunya and dengue virus outbreaks and the potential of these rapidly evolving viruses to escape host immunity and vaccination. So again, just refined and maybe slightly clearer, at least in my mind. I hope it's clearer. And that was what was put out in the grant application. So an overall objective, which is the main research question, and then the specifics on how you're going to get it done. So just some ideas of some common mistakes: ensuring you don't have too much information. It has to be relevant. Or sometimes you don't have enough information because you're trying to beat the word limit, but then you lose out on the coherence of it. So just getting that right balance and putting in what you think is important. So in this example, this first sentence up until 38 degrees is not necessary. You can just get on with what you want to do given your word limit. Just an example that I also pick up is that people tend to put figures or an image and then you forget to cite it in the text. So for instance, this paragraph at the top of the figure, the image at the top of the figure is not cited. So that doesn't put your writing into context. So ensure that's done. Again, clarity, ensuring you know what the study is, and make sure it's in pros and cons, not as a list. And think about the outline that was said. So just having some structure to it so it's not confusing. So think about your methods as well, what you will do, how you will do it, and what's required to do it. So these are just examples in the text, giving the numbers, the sites and location, and the sample size so people understand. You can think about the location of the work, your age range, your time frames, and the statistics you're going to use. Again, you state them in short sentences. And these are just some examples of how you're going to do it. You do collections between the 1st and 15th of June 2015, and the method used was the CDC light traps. So errors, just remember to use the right symbols, italicize these Latin words, remove your spelling mistakes and grammatical errors. I've talked about the mistakes already. So I'll just come to ethical clearance. So remember, if you need it, say you need it. If you already have it, then state you have it, because that's a bonus. It means your work will move on pretty smoothly and you won't need this additional time to get your study up and running. And when you're thinking about the data management and sharing plan, these are just what I've highlighted here is just things to think about. When you think about data management, you need password protected servers, you need backup, and where you're going to put the information. So it's shared if it's on like a shared platform, particularly for bioinformatic data. If you're using data for analysis, if you're doing any data sharing, you're using open access, the public available databases. Potentially you're doing presentations or seminars. And if you have a data governance committee in your institution, highlight that as well, because it's a governance system for managing and sharing data. The other section that needs to be clear is your expected outcomes, and this sometimes can be confused with outputs. So outcomes are just essentially what's the impact of the work? How's it going to relate to public health changes, tool development, policy impact? Are you going to change any guidelines? So it's the why of the project and why it is important. And here are just some examples. I'll go back to chikungunya and dengue, that potentially you want to do some phylogenetic analysis to look at either historical and contemporary chikungunya and dengue sequences, so you can identify new lineages and the spread of lineages across Africa and Asia. Or you want to be putting your data in these publicly available databases, such as for whole genome sequencing data, like in Pathogen Watch or the ACON platform, and that makes it available to your collaborators or to the Ministry of Health. So those are examples, of outcomes. And then you think about your deliverables and milestones. Sometimes I think of it as the same thing, but what will your project deliver? And think of the activities that are being done, how you'll deliver them, or what milestones will be achieved. So this is an example. If you're doing applicant sequencing or whole genome sequencing, then that's the activity, the sequencing. What you're delivering is either a sequence data or a library preparation, what you do in the laboratory. And a list of milestones is what you need to do to get there. So you probably need to order reagents, or ensure that you have the personnel available to run the machine and the data that you generate. So these examples are pretty much the same. So you're just really thinking about what can I deliver on that activity and what would I need to do to achieve that deliverable as a milestone. So those are what you can think about putting in the milestone section. So here's an example again, and you can link it in with your timelines. So, for instance, if your objective is to do molecular classification of fungal species, then probably your first activity is to design primers, extract DNA, and optimize them. And then you can shade the timeline section so that people can see how long that process will take. So this was about writing thesis or whatever you're thinking about, at least thinking about putting those, or if you're doing theses, if it's you have a student, or if it's yourself putting in a manuscript, you can run these things concurrently with your experimental work, so that everything is not unique blocks of time. And then my final section I was told to touch on was just really thinking about tips for writing short bios and CVs. They're pretty similar, but your bio would be 100 words of continuous prose. It highlights your academic credentials, your work experience, and your scientific citizenship. Your CV would be in bullet points, your academic credentials, employment history, work experience. Make sure you highlight what grants you've won, what projects you've led to just show leadership, your scientific citizenship. Have you organized a conference, chaired an institutional meeting, had any scientific administrative roles? And for the publication list, because you might have very many, you can just think of your top 10 and then say why that's important and give a link to your ORCID number. And don't forget to add your referees at the end. I think I come to the end of my section. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you for that really excellent presentation, Professor Oya. There are a number of questions coming through in the chat. It would be great if you have some time to go through the Q&A and see if you can answer any of those directly. There are some there that I think are specifically for you. And there are kind of two key themes coming through in the questions that I think might be interesting and be good to hear if you've got an opinion about. One is around Francophone countries. So quite a few people are asking, well, what about if I'm from a Francophone environment? We've focused a lot on the English language. I don't know if you have an opinion on that one. And the second question that's coming up a few times is, this is the age of AI. What advice do we have around that? So I think we've got just a couple of minutes before we go to the break. So I wondered if you would be able to answer any of those themes quickly before we break.
So maybe I'll start with the AI one and work backwards. I think AI has its utility. Like I mentioned in your writing, you could do your first draft of ideas and put it down on a Word document. And I'll use the simple AI just that can pick up some of your grammatical errors or spelling mistakes. That's really useful. You get that out of the way. The reason being, when the reviewer is reading your grant application and there are all these errors, it makes it very difficult for them to focus on actually the science you're selling. So there's some utility there. The other way people are using AI is writing their ideas and then throwing it into AI to come up with a better version of what they've written. You could do that, but you have to make sure it still makes scientific sense. So AI can only as good as the data that's already in there. So I think it has some utility, but you've got to read what comes out of the AI and still make sure it says what you want to say and how and what you mean essentially in regards to the literature and what we know about that topic area. So that's my view on AI. It's also a good way to search these days. I think Google AI, when you're doing a search, comes up with some good papers that you could use. So AI is useful in making sure you can get your literature review together and making sure you're finding the right literature. So I'd use it there and make sure you're doing a lot of reading. AI can't do the reading for you. And for you to be able to sell your idea, you have to have read quite widely because it helps you express yourself more clearly and to sell your idea well. Your question then on, I think it was on the Francophone, because we're focusing a lot on sort of English-speaking countries. My sense is it would be the same. If you're writing a grant, you start as early as we would in Anglophone Africa. As I said, English is not easy as it was. I mean, I was saying what to use and what not to use. It's just something that needs practice. So, and the sooner you start with the grants application and give yourself enough lead time, that's why I said if you can start a year before with some of your thinking, and then your ideas are ready for when calls become available. So it's about giving yourself enough time. And for the Francophones, just ensuring you use your Anglophone friends as much as possible, or your Anglophone mentors and supervisors to help you read through the writing and to make sure there's just clarity around that. I'm hoping that's where the question was coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
That's very helpful. I just have one more point to add about AI, which is that if you are using AI in a grant application, it is incredibly important that you declare the use of the AI. So you need to say that you have used it and how you have used it. So if you have used it, for example, to help draw a figure, then you need to say so. If you have used it just to check the English and the grammar, then say so. And it may not necessarily impact your proposal negatively if you declare, depending on how you've used it, of course, but it will certainly impact your proposal negatively if you do not declare the use of AI. And I think we need to stop here for now and have a break. We will come back in 10 minutes' time. And our next presenter will be Dr. Evelyn Kestelin from my unit, OCRU in Vietnam. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. I would like to introduce Dr. Evelyn Castellan. Evelyn is a clinical trial research expert with over 20 years of experience designing, overseeing, and conducting clinical trials in low and middle income countries, particularly in vaccines and therapeutics, with a focus on locally led and context appropriate research. She leads major global initiatives, including WHO's Clinical Trials Unit Maturity Framework, and promotes locally driven research, equitable partnerships, and capacity building through collaborations like the Africa-Asia Alliance for Clinical Trials. Evelyn is the head of the Clinical Trials Unit at OCRU in Vietnam, and I would like to invite you to share your screen, Evelyn. That's great. We can see.
Thank you for the introduction, Katrina. I hope everyone can see my slides. So I want to thank the organizers for putting this workshop together. It's clear that a lot of people have looked forward to this and that there is a big demand in terms of support with grant writing. I've personally really enjoyed the first two sessions. I think it was a really nice mix of very practical kind of hands-on and detailed advice, as well as some bigger picture issues. So I've been asked to share with you some of my tips and some of my experience with regards to building collaborative proposals. And I'm going to start off maybe a bit more high level than the previous presenters, but I think that framing and context is always incredibly important. And as most of you will know, we've seen a rise in scale and scope of collaborative global health research. And this is due to a variety of reasons. There are scientific factors to explain this interest in global health research, such as new scientific developments and techniques. But some of this is also driven by funding initiatives like the Gates Foundation, like the Wellcome Trust, who are really encouraging different researchers, different research institutions to work together. The event of large data sets becoming available, but also the fact that as researchers, we are addressing health disparities that are better addressed through global initiatives than individual initiatives. So a variety of reasons why we have more now than ever an interest in global health research. But it's very important to realize that research does not exist in a vacuum. And the title of the slide is Parasitic and Parachute Research, and it refers to a type of neo-colonial vision of research where researchers parachute into countries to collect data and samples and leave, or have a parasitic approach to research where they don't even come to the countries themselves, but they gather data and samples through different initiatives without actually contributing to any local research strengthening, research development, that is really not what we think about when we think about global health research. And it's important to understand that this type of research does not take into account the complex ecosystems in which research take place. We're talking about history, politics, economic partnerships, and all of this is important not only when we consider relationships or partnerships between different collaborators, between different researchers, but also when we think about the impact that our research has and the power that our research has to either respond and change or reaffirm certain health inequalities. And so I think this is quite high level, but I think when we consider global health research, when we consider research partnerships and research collaborations, it's really important to keep that in mind. because it's not only quantity, but it's also quality. So we can look at the number of collaborations. We can boast that we are working as Oxford, for example, across the globe. We can boast that we have 20,000 research collaborations, and this is just an example. This is not, this is hypothetical. But does the amount of collaborations, does the amount of networks that we're part of really say anything about the quality? Does it give an insight into whether these collaborations are equal or fair? Or are we perpetuating certain relationships? And the consequences of perpetuating these relationships could be diverse, but it could go into making sure that things don't change, whether we're talking about publications, whether we're talking about principal investigators, whether we're talking about building that capacity. If it's the same people who are always benefiting, then we can question and ask ourselves, is this fair? And so again, when we are talking about partnerships, when we are talking about collaborations, I think it's really important to not only look at quantity, but to look at quality and to look at whether these partnerships and collaborations continue to perpetuate current inequalities, or whether they're really based on foundations of equality and sustainability for that matter. So that was just to give you a bit of a context to global health collaborations, but why is it so important? Why do we see more and more collaborations, and why does it matter? And so I think that collaborations are important because they enhance scientific quality and innovation. And why is that? Because when you work as a team, when you work with people with a diverse set of skills, with diverse expertise, you can really come at a problem from different angles and give a more comprehensive and rigorous answer to certain questions. But it also stimulates creativity. And we've talked about innovation, we've heard about innovation from the previous presenters as something that is an element that funders look at. And funders want to see novel ways of addressing a question. And I think it's very hard to come up with novel ways of addressing a question if it's just you sitting behind your computer. You have to create an environment where you are stimulated. You have to create an environment where you interact with researchers with different backgrounds, with different skill sets that challenge your assumptions and can really lead you to think about new perspectives, to generate novel hypotheses or generate novel methods to answer existing hypotheses. So collaboration matters because it brings different people together that think about things in different ways and that can generate new research questions and new ideas. But it also strengthens research credibility and impact. If you have a group of people or a group of collaborators that are looking at each other's methodology that maybe have different methodological backgrounds, that will help you by cross-checking your ideas, cross-checking your data, and that can help with enhancing your scientific rigor. But working in a bigger team can also help to disseminate your findings and to have a bigger impact. And the word impact is something that we've also heard from the two previous presenters. This is, again, something that funders will look at in terms of what will be the outcomes, what will be the impact of your proposed grant, your proposed research product. So it's not only collaborative publications that often reach a broader audience, but by having a network of collaborators, those collaborators in turn will disseminate their results within their network, and you get a kind of snowball effect of dissemination of your findings and of your impact. And last but not least, it can increase efficiency and productivity. Because if you work across a network, you can share resources and infrastructures. And a very practical example of that is, for when my network is looking for partners to, let's say, conduct a clinical trial with, we can offer expertise in clinical monitoring of that trial. And so our expertise in monitoring can be used by all the collaborators. They don't have to develop their own expertise in monitoring, or they don't have to outsource it to CROs that are quite expensive. But no, they can use our monitoring expertise across the network for that clinical trial. And so in sharing resources and infrastructures, that means that you can be more efficient, and you can potentially engage in bigger research proposals. It can also accelerate timelines. And this shared infrastructure, shared resources translating into efficiency and productivity is something that funders really like to see. And that's why I put in brackets greater funding potential. Funders like to see that working together, that using of resources, especially if you're working with collaborators that might be funded through the same funder, they like to see that the funding that they have given can amplify impact by making people work together. But so we talked about making sure that your collaborations are not only quantitative, importantly. And so when I talk about quantity, I'm talking about impact, I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about efficiency, but we've also talked about quality. And I want to share with you on the bottom of the slide, you see a link to a publication from Mike Parker and Patricia Kigori, both linked to the Oxford ETOX Institute looking at ethics in global health research. And they wrote a paper called Good and Bad Research Collaborations, Researchers' Views on Science and Ethics in Global Health Research. And they did interviews, they did in-depth interviews, they did focus group discussions to really talk to researchers and ask them what do they thought were factors that were important to successful research collaborations. And they are linked here on the slide. So it's things from active involvement in interesting science. They wanted to do something that they thought was interesting, was cutting edge, effective leadership, capacity building, trust and confidence. So I'm not going to read all of them, but these are clearly more value-driven factors that not always align with words like efficiency, cost efficiency, but they are so important when talking about research collaborations. And it was something that I wanted to share with you, because you can have tips, you can have real practical advice, but it's really important to understand that soft skills, values, and norms are elements that are really important when you're talking about establishing collaborations, but also when you're talking about maintaining collaborations and ultimately having successful research collaborations. And so I wanted to translate those concepts into 3 further elements. So why is collaboration important? It builds capacity and it enhances equity. So collaboration helps in trying to not maintain the status quo of having the research always being funded and conducted by the same people in the same regions, such as high-income countries, because the infrastructure is there, because the knowledge is there. Collaboration can help to promote equitable global research. And when you collaborate with certain partners, that can help to support training. You can bring in mentorship in your collaborative proposals. But you can also tackle bigger, large-scale studies. If you bring together multiple sites and people with diverse skill set, people who have expertise in genomics or who have expertise in climate health research. So those types of research proposals are very interesting, but require multiple sites, require a certain participant number, which can be achieved through collaborative approaches. And then last but not least, it can align with ethical and societal responsibilities. If you work with collaboratively with different researchers, they in turn work with different communities. They have to sometimes justify their work to different policymakers, to different stakeholders. They work in different health systems. So by working with different collaborators, you can ensure that your work aligns with these different contexts, with these different health systems. But not only that, it will build trust because people will see that you are working with a variety of partners, a variety of collaborators, and you are promoting equal partnership. You are promoting fair recognition of all contributors. And that is, again, an element that is really, really important when thinking about collaborations. So, now that we know what type of collaborators we would like ideally and what type of collaborations we ideally would like, how do we now go about that in a practical sense? And there were a few mentions or questions in the Q&A section that I saw that asked, how can I find a collaborator? How can I find a collaborator in a high-income country? How can I find a collaborator with maybe a certain skill set? So I think that first and foremost, it's important to have an idea of what type of proposal that you are aiming for, that you want to develop. And then you should map out the expertise that is required to bring that proposal to a successful outcome. So you outline the expertise, and then you can look at potential collaborators who possess that skill set or that knowledge. And these can be people that you've worked with before, but these could be people that you have not met yet. And how do you come into contact with potential new collaborators? It's through using your existing networks. It's through attending conferences, attending workshops just like these, and really utilize your professional network to meet new potential collaborators. Engage with your peers. Quite often people look for collaborators and they say, oh, but I'm looking for someone in Europe, or I'm looking for someone in the US, or I'm looking for someone in Africa. And they forget that sometimes collaborators can be found much closer to home. So engage with your peers, attend conferences, talk to people, and just see if there are collaborators that might share your potential interest. But you can also use other resources, and AI has popped up in the QA several times. And I think that there is a wealth of information out there on internet. You can use AI. You can use so many different resources to find potential collaborators. If you are developing a project around a certain team, a certain disease, a certain expertise, explore the literature. Look at who has published around that similar topic, and look at who has authored gray literature or peer-reviewed manuscript around that topic, and email them. There is always an email for a corresponding author. Look people up in research databases and reach out. I want to just highlight one of these resources, and you can see there's a picture on the right-hand side of the slide, and it's Pandemic Pact, and it has a really nice overview of different research opportunities and mainly related to pandemic prevention, but very interesting. So as you can see, it delivers over 25 billion in research funding across more than 26,000 grants from 361 global funders. So you can start exploring that as a way to get familiar with how these databases work. But this is just one of the examples. Like I said, there is so much out there that you can use. I put a little star in the bottom, and that's a bit food for thought. I think working with people that you've worked with before, known collaborators, is always a good starting point. But sometimes I have discussions with people and I ask them, why did you put so-and-so on your grant as a collaborator? And their reply will be, well, because we always work together. And I think it is important to have known collaborators because you know what they will contribute, you know how they work, very important. But I also think that it is important to not keep working with the same people just because you've been working with them. They might not have the necessary expertise for this grant. The sites that they work with might not have the best study population for that specific proposal. So I think for each proposal, it's really good to think about, map the expertise. Who do you need? Who would make this grant a success? Who can contribute the necessary expertise, skill set, network to deliver the outputs and ultimately the outcome of your proposal? So just something to keep in mind. The other thing that I've heard before is about starting early with your research proposal. It is the exact same advice for starting collaborations early. It is important to discuss your common goals and interests early, and this is to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And you could think that people have agreed to start this collaboration with you and assume, sometimes wrongfully, that that means you're all on the same page. Well, I can tell you that is not the case, especially, and we'll talk about that later, if you are thinking about having multidisciplinary approaches to a research question. So discuss common goals, discuss interests really early on to ensure that you all have a unified vision. And to help that, you can work on a concept note together. I think it's a really maybe small practical step, but it is so important to develop a concept note jointly, because that will allow you to kind of really have these discussions early on about what are your research questions? What do you think the best objectives are for our research? What do you think the best methodology will be, the best tools? And so it really helps not only to get to know maybe new collaborators, but really to clarify and crystallize the ideas you have, to think about a focused way of thinking about where do you want to go, what is the question that you want to answer, how do you want to answer it, and to make sure that everyone is on that same page. And that will make the whole project life cycle so much smoother. So having these discussions early on, even if they might not always be easy, will really be so important throughout the project. And the same goes for clarifying roles. Clarifying and defining roles early on is really important, not only because it helps with accountability, but it avoids misunderstandings and it ensures that everyone knows what they have to do to contribute to the success. And again, it is so important to talk about that early on. I put a little star there, food for thought, and you can see the cartoon there that says, "Welcome to the co-authors party, you're number 21." And so when I talk about clarifying roles, I'm not only talking about clarifying roles in terms of who is the lead, who is the co-lead, but really going down to the nitty-gritty level of who is going to help with coordination, who is going to be the person that sets up the weekly calls, but also what about authorships? What about data management? This is part of the responsibilities. And maybe for a junior researcher, it might be difficult to start that conversation, but do it anyway. It is so important to ask about authorships. You want clarity. You want to know what is going to happen later on in the project. It avoids misunderstandings. It avoids really awkward situations or discussions when you have already moved into the project, when you're maybe already drafting a manuscript. Have these discussions early on. It is so, so important. And so I've been asked to talk a bit about designing multi-country projects and designing interdisciplinary projects. And so what I have found as elements of success for designing multi-country projects is leveraging local strengths. So it is really difficult to design a multi-country project when you have an idea and it is an idea or a methodology or an expertise that is not prevalent in those countries, because then you might be seen as someone who is again going to jump in, maybe with their parachute, to come and set up something that might not be necessarily important to local expertise, that might not necessarily strengthen local expertise. So it is so important to understand local context and to utilize that local expertise when you are developing those projects. It's important to foster community support and to make sure that whatever outcomes you have align with local or regional needs. And this alignment with priorities is something that comes back as a second point because it is so important. It is important because your funders will look at whether your research project aligns with local and regional needs. But also you will get stakeholder buy-in, and stakeholders can be your ethics committee members. It could be the regulatory authorities that need to approve your project. It could be your community where you're going to recruit. And the likelihood of getting support and acceptance from all of these different groups is much, much higher when it aligns with their own priorities, when they understand why you are doing certain research. If I am doing research around malaria, for example, or dengue in Vietnam, most people have had that disease themselves already. Most people have had family members that have been affected by that disease. In terms of stakeholders from the government, they understand the burden of disease for their countries. They understand the burden to hospitals, the burden to productivity. And so they understand why research around dengue or malaria would be important. They might be less understanding when you talk about a disease that is maybe more prevalent in high-income countries, or a very rare disease, or a disease that requires drugs that are very, very expensive that you are not planning to make available to the local populations. So aligning with priorities is important. And when designing a multi-country project, which means you have multiple countries, multiple contexts, and multiple priorities, it's really important to think about that at the designing stage. And then ensuring balance, maintaining a balanced approach between participating collaborators. And when I talk about collaborators, this could be countries or regions. So we want to avoid dominance of one collaborator, one region. We want to promote equitable contributions and shared ownership throughout the project. And that's another way where we can ensure that there is this training, this mentorship that I was talking about earlier. And so how do you ensure balance? And again, a bit of food for thought. It's by creating a win-win situation. And I think that researchers quite often don't have that mindset of that maybe competitive or more economical way of thinking, but this win-win mentality and this win-win way of thinking can be really beneficial when you are developing project, because it will make you consider, what am I getting out of this project, but what are other people getting out of this project? And if people feel that they're not getting enough out of this project, then I can assure you that first of all, your project will probably be not as successful as it could be. But second of all, long term, these collaborators might not be persuaded again to work with you in the future. So thinking about what is there to gain for all the collaborators in this project is really important. And it could be that these are different things for different collaborators, but it is important to think about that at the designing stage. All of the elements that I just talked about are equally as important for interdisciplinary project, but we'll touch upon that later. So now I first want to share some real practical tips when you are designing and implementing multi-country projects. When you are designing multi-country projects, communication and planning are crucial. They are important for any project that you design, but when you are talking to people that are in different time zones, to people that speak different languages, to people that have different cultural contexts, which means different public holidays, people might be using different calendars, like in Nepal, for example, planning becomes crucial. Your project will not succeed if you don't have very good, transparent communication and optimal project management and planning. So that is really important. So think about that when you're designing your project, and make sure that you're planning some funding to allow for staff to help with that coordination, to allow for tools to help with planning. So put that in your budget. It will show funders that you are aware of the burden of operational planning when it comes to multi-country projects. So planning helps you think and anticipate. Think about risk management when you are planning these projects. Risk management is good to do in any project, but again, if you are collaborating across multiple countries, sometimes across multiple continents, you really need to think about what could be some of the potential risks that could prevent me from reaching the intended impact in this project. You have internal, external influences. So it is important to think through that, but it is equally important to realize what you have control over and what you have to let go. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic was a good example of situations where we could not control everything. And so we had to carefully balance what we thought was important and what we would control, as opposed to certain elements or certain things that we just had to let go of. I think defining clear leadership and governance structures, again, is important. If you're doing a research in one country, it's well, let's say, defined. But if you're working across different countries, it is so important to have a good governance structure, to have clear leadership, because very easily things will spin out of control if people are not aware of who is doing what. And clear leadership, people might be duplicating each other's work, or the work might not be done at all because maybe someone is thinking, oh, that's somebody else's job. So really important to have these clear governance structures and roles and responsibilities in place. I talked about communication already. People management communication, so important, and so I think undervalued. I have seen really successful projects really get off the rails because of bad communication, because people were not listening to each other, because people were not showing empathy for each other's context. So don't underestimate the soft skills and the people management. And then last but not least, it's really important to manage expectations towards the team and the funders. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when you are designing multi-country projects, these projects are already very complex, very challenging. So it is really important to set a clear goal and to have a focused outcome and manage expectations. Say, what we are going to do in this project is this and nothing else. So really make sure that you have a focused, well-aligned project, and that you don't allow scope creep, which is something I will touch upon later, to come into your project. And that means that scope creep means that the scope of your project is slowly becoming broader. Things start creeping in, and that will make it so much harder to have your project attain their main outcomes, because now you're thinking about all these other things that need to happen. So manage expectations both towards the team and the funders. No, I'm really sorry. I know that you're doing a PhD project, but you cannot just very quickly add on a few questions in our project. You can say that to somebody who's asking in your team, or towards the funders. Yes, we know that we've set this up, and we know that we could do X, Y, and Z in addition, but we're not going to do that. And generally, funders will listen to that and actually will respect that and will understand that you know what you're talking about, and that you are ensuring that you can meet the outcomes of your project successfully by protecting your time and that level of work that needs to happen to make your project successful. So designing interdisciplinary grants, again, everything I've said about multi-country grants applies here. The communication, the focus, all applies to interdisciplinary grants, but there are a few elements that are, let's say, specific to interdisciplinary grants. Because you are integrating diverse fields of research skills and expertise. So how to design successful interdisciplinary grants is by designing integrated research questions. What does that mean? That means that you have research questions where all different skills and disciplines are integrated in. And that ensures that everybody feels equally valued. That ensures that everybody contributes equally and effectively. And that is important because diverse disciplinaries have diverse priorities. Each discipline might have its own goals, incentives, expectations. If we think, for example, about publications versus policy influence, take into consideration that you are working with a medical anthropologist versus a health economist. So different expectations. Shared frameworks are very similar. So by building a shared framework, you allow collaborators to align methodologies, understand sometimes very discipline-specific jargon, and have a mutual understanding of the expectations throughout the project. And finally, something that I'm a big fan of is mixed methods. So you're using mixed methods. You can integrate quantitative and qualitative insight for a more holistic and comprehensive understanding of your research question. And this is something that funders like to see. Are you adding a health economic question to the development of your new drug? Do you have a social scientist looking at acceptability of this new drug? So all these different disciplines can really help you to create a much stronger impact in your research proposal. There are some challenges in data compatibility and evaluation of certain metrics. But again, if you think about that from the beginning early on, then this is something that can be overcome. And so to round off, because I think my time is almost up, I just want to leave you with these key takeaways. So collaboration is challenging and is hard, but is so rewarding because it brings with it innovation, it brings with it creativity, it brings with it bigger impact through generalizability, but it can also lead to capacity strengthening, knowledge exchange. It can lead to bigger policy and societal impact, and it has strategic and funding advantages, mainly linked back to operational efficiency and sustainability. And so it is so important to work with people that you align with in terms of ideas. It is so important to think about how you are going to manage different people, different contexts. Communication is crucial to any project. And last but not least, respect. And I'm going to end off here and hand back over to Katrina, I think.
Thank you, Evelyn. That was such an important presentation. And I think the issues you raised around equitability are not talked about enough. And it's really great that you did raise that today for this session. There's lots of questions for you coming in the comments, so please take a look and we will ask you to address some of them in the Q&A session later on. For everybody here waiting with bated breath, it's my turn to present. I'm going to talk to you guys very briefly about budgeting, costing and pricing your research. And let me just share my screen. Move a few things out of the way. Okay. So for those of you who missed the very beginning, my name is Katrina Lawson. I am a grants manager. I'm also manage communications and policy engagement for Oxford University Clinical Research Unit, which is a multi-country unit, but based in Vietnam. Our headquarters are in Vietnam. I've been working in grant management for around 20 years, and so I have a little bit of experience in costing, pricing research. I want to start with a thought experiment. Imagine that your community of 20 people is starving and you've been given a 2 kilo bag of rice. So, I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be quite so drastic. I don't want to traumatize anybody here, but just imagine you have to figure out what to do with your 2 kilos, sorry. And so you decide to divide your rice evenly among your 20 people, 100 grams each. This is essentially what a budget is, right? Here's your big bag of rice. You're going to divide it up this way. I mean, there's infinite ways that you can divide up a bag of rice. You're deciding to go evenly, 100 grams for everybody. But in reality, we all know that 100 grams of rice is not enough to feed a person, not even for one day. So what can you do? You need something different. So this is where we think, well, if I actually need to feed people properly, I'm going to need 3 of those bags of rice for one day. I'm going to need 5 kilos of veggies, and I'm going to need at least 20 eggs, right? So this is what we call costing, where we think about what we actually need and what resources we need in order to do the things that we want to do. Maybe it's to survive as researchers, maybe it's to produce a project or an outcome. So now we can approach our funders. We can say to our first funder, great, we're so happy that you've given us the rice, keep giving us the rice. The price for them is their original 1 bag of rice. That's what we're going to charge them as our 1 bag of rice. No change. But maybe we find a second funder who can give us some more rice and the vegetables, right? So we've got another price to a different funder. What we need hasn't changed, but where our resources are coming from might be more diversified. And for our third funder, maybe we're going to be a bit more creative. Our price will be different. Our price this time, it's not eggs. We know we need eggs, but really we want to be sustainable. We're going to get ourselves some chickens from the third funder. The reason I've said that is because when we're thinking about costing and pricing research, we're always talking about budgets. What is our budget? What is our budget? But actually, at a pre-award stage, before you've got the money, you're not budgeting, you're costing and pricing. You need to be thinking about how much your research costs, and you need to be thinking about how much does your funder need to pay to be able to make your research be sustainable as possible. You also need to be aware that in most cases, this is not for profit. You can't just say, well, I want you to give me more than I need. You need to demonstrate value for money. This is the chickens. Chickens in the long run are going to be cheaper than continuing to provide eggs. So when I'm talking to people about budgeting, I like to emphasize this difference between cost versus price versus budget. You might come across this term FEC, or full economic cost. That means the total cost of your project, including any hidden costs that might not be charged to the funder at all, costs that your university might absorb, for example. So that first tick, 2 kilos of rice, let's just imagine as an analogy that that's the indirect cost that your institution is going to cover. You don't necessarily charge that to the next funder because that's already covered. The price that you put in your budget, in your application, that's the amount of money you're asking for. Might not be exactly the same as the cost. Quite often it's a little bit less. And the budget, well, that's for later. Budgeting is how you're going to spend the money after you've had it awarded. And oftentimes you might need to negotiate how much your budget will actually end up being versus what you asked for. I think many people here have probably had the experience requesting a grant with a certain amount of money and being awarded the grant, but with a smaller budget. The way you do your costing is that it must be generated by your research activities. This means that you need to think about what kind of things are you going to be doing, when are you going to be doing it, who's doing it, what resources are people going to need to do the thing, and how long is it going to take, how long are you going to need the money for. Also, every organization I've ever worked at has had the same rule, which is that you must, as someone who's requesting funding, try to recover as much of that full economic cost, as much of the full cost of research as possible. Your institution doesn't want to lose money in supporting you if there's a funder that can pay. Most funders are going to be paying you, and it's easy to think about the direct costs of research. That's the things that you pay for that are quite tangible, that you can definitely say, this is a thing that this project needs to pay for. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, what those might be. So here's an easy one, equipment. If you need equipment, that's an easy direct cost. It's not always allowed. Lots of funders will say you can't request equipment. But if they do, and Wellcome is a great funder that often allows you to request equipment, sometimes you might need co-funding, but if you do get the opportunity to request equipment, remember, include the maintenance fees and include depreciation if you're allowed to include depreciation. Here's another one, IT. Do you need computers? You probably do. Do you need bits and pieces to go with the computer, like your mouse? Do you need software? Don't forget about that. And data, how are you going to manage the data for the IT stuff? That means you might need a data management plan as well. So you can see that thinking about the kinds of things that you need, or the kind of activities that you're going to do, will help you to build your budget and figure out how much it's going to cost. Similarly, for consumables, there are some that are obvious and easy, like your lab supplies, chemicals. Others that people tend to forget are things like PPE, like the printing cost for your participant consent forms, for example. Is anyone going anywhere to do this work? So thinking about the activities, any field work, are there going to be meetings? A lot of funders are requiring that we're quite careful about carbon footprint these days. Do you really need to fly? Do you really need to travel? What can you do online? And don't forget those other little bits and pieces of cost, because they do add up, like per diems and like having to get a taxi at the new city when you're traveling. There might be costs that you also want to consider to include in your budget, like, does your project need a logo of its own? Do you need your own website? Do you need to do social media to generate participants, for example? And if you do, who's going to manage it? How will you present at conferences if you haven't got travel budget, if you haven't got all those kinds of things in your communication budget? Another thing that's quite important nowadays is there's often a requirement that you make your publications available open access. So can you include publication costs? And if not, how are you going to publish? If you're doing clinical research, I think quite a lot of people here today are, there are very specialized costs, like the cost for drugs, like the cost for hospital fees. There might be ethics approvals. There might need to do lengthy informed consents, which means that you need to pay staff a bit more. You may have thought about patient compensation, but that also means that you have to compensate patients' families and their caregivers for their time as well. Compensating doctors and nurses who maybe work for the hospital but not directly for you. These are additional clinical types of costs that must be included. And finally, never forget to pay your salaries for your staff. This is usually the biggest component of a budget. Staffing costs, you might have consultants. Perhaps you can add administration staff or specialized research support staff as a direct cost to your budget, and you probably do need to add some time for yourself if it's allowable and your institution is likely to force you to. Additionally, in your budget needs to have indirect costs. This is all the stuff that your university or your institution needs to pay for, but can't say that it's only incurred specifically because of your project. So that might mean things like security, like audits, like insurance, like the cleaning staff, like the maintenance guy. It might mean bank fees. It might mean some kinds of taxes. All of these things that are a little bit nebulous. You must consult with your university about what those costs are and whether and how to calculate with them. Like, don't assume that you are going to be able to request the entire budget envelope and use all of it to pay for your direct costs. Usually some of that budget envelope is going to have to go to your institution to help pay their running costs, and you want it to. Because when you invest in the running costs by investing in by allowing your university to claim indirect costs, then you have a better chance of getting more support in your institution, and you're developing the capacity for your institution to do research and to support you in the future. Just some final thoughts. If you have collaborators, make sure you've read the rules quite carefully around what your collaborators can claim and what they can't, particularly if you have put together a research team that comes from different parts of the world. So for example, sometimes high-income countries are not really allowed to claim costs for themselves, only for collaborators from low-income countries, for example. And remember that if your institution can have indirect costs, your collaborator's institution will also have indirect costs, and they might be different rates, but whatever they put in their budget, they should be allowed to keep from the awarded budget. Another thing to consider if you're putting together a bigger project with international collaborations is collaborators in different countries. There might be real currency concerns, so you need to make sure that you're using a sensible exchange rate. My recommendation is something like the average exchange over the previous 12 months if you don't have an institutional rate already for that currency. You also need to be able to show that your collaborators have agreed their budget. I quite often see, even to this day, people hoping to say, well, I'll just put 50,000 aside for that collaborator. And that is not quite an equitable collaboration. You need to be sure that your collaborator has agreed that that budget is going to be appropriate for them. Because if they come back later and say, but I can't do it with the money you've given me, then your project is going to hit a real difficulty. But when you're working with collaborators, it can be hard to get them to do stuff on time, right? So you need to have clear instructions, and you need to sort of address your own leadership as well. Make sure that your collaborators know what's expected of them, follow up, give them good timelines, make sure they provide you with justification as well as the costs that they're requesting, and they provide you with all the documentation that you need. Finally, I just want to talk very quickly about justifying your budget. You will know that you may have seen, that you are often asked to provide a budget justification, not just the numbers, but also the explanation of why you need that justification. There's a lot to this, and obviously it's something that we could talk about to a lot of detail, and we don't have a ton of time, but the justification means that you explain why you've requested that money. Explain what you need, how you're going to use it, and why it's important. If it's something really expensive, like that fancy microscope we saw before, maybe you need a quote as well, or several quotes to show that this is a good value for money request that you've got. And as I said before, sometimes your funder comes back and says, no, I can't give you all the money you want, but I do want to fund your budget. I do want to fund your project. The reality is we can't just cut the budget. We can't submit an inflated budget that's not the real budget. And we can't just cut the budget and still deliver everything, because we're generally working on this not-for-profit basis. So my advice for researchers is if they're going to cut the price, then you have to reduce the scope. That means that actually when you're putting together your application and your proposal, you're not putting together one, you need to put together at least two. The expensive gold class, absolute best research project you can imagine. And that if I had to do it for cheaper, I could do this instead project and still deliver good results. The worst case scenario is you accept a reduced budget and then you spend time completing a project but don't deliver good results. So you have to only accept a budget cut if you can deliver good results that are going to get you publications that you can use to further your career. So I want to say good luck. You've got this. There are lots of experts here and lots of people in the audience who have been through it before. Pop your questions in the chat and we will try to deal with them. Thank you. Okay. Just give me 1 second. So our next presenter is Sheikha Salum Mohammed. She is the African Regional Mesh Coordinator, affiliated with both the Global Health Network at the University of Oxford and Ifakara Health Institute in Tanzania. She leads community engagement and partnerships across Africa and focuses on participatory research, capacity building, and supporting young scientists in low-resource settings with over a decade of experience in global health projects. Welcome, Sheikha.
Thank you so much, Katrina, and thank you for a very wonderful presentation on costings. I will share my slides. Can you confirm that my screen is shared?
Yes, it looks really great.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, my name is Sheikha Salum Mohammed. I work with the TGHN and also working with the Ifakara Health Institute, which is based in Tanzania. So today I will speak about how to complete stakeholder engagement and community engagement section in grant application for the solid purpose of enhancing the proposal quality through inclusive collaboration. So first and foremost, it's important to understand that we could have a range of different goals in stakeholder and community engagement. And these goals really differ based on the stage of the research. As we can see here, we can have the before research, during research, and also after research. So therefore, before research, the main goal here could be you might want to aim to understand the community norms and value. You might also want to identify the local health priority of that particular community. Or we could also want to see how we can promote the understanding of that research that you want to do on that community. But also how ethical is the idea to that community. As I would like to emphasize that community engagement is not a one-size-fits-all. So this also gives us to the next point that acceptability and also feasibility of the research idea, you have to ensure that it aligns with that particular community. Another thing is during the research, here is where we aim to gain the permission of the community consent. This is where we do the apply for the ethical clearance. This is where we improve the communication between the researcher and the community, and also we improve the recruitment and retention rate. So during the research, also this is where we improve the relationship, we improve the trust and partnership between the researchers and the community, which would be a long-lasting relationship. And after the research, that's where we disseminate the results. We present the findings to the community. Also, we leverage that long partnership that we have created through the research circle. And also, this is where we can improve or we can promote the uptake of the intervention, which has just been derived from the research that we have worked on. So in this session, we will talk about the engagement which might be conducted upstream or before the research, and how we could feed that into the proposal, and how we can put together the engagement strategy. So first, it's important we understand what is upstream engagement and why it matters. So for the past 4 or 5 years or so, funders have been demanding, funder has increasingly demand the upstream engagement to feed into the application. Also, you can see from this blue box that it's an extract from a Wellcome discovery application where a funder is asking, how have you involved patients, patient advocacy groups, or communities in developing your proposal? What ongoing involvement will they have in the research? 200 words. So this is where you have to explain to funder the upstream engagement that you have done. So this is welcome, but we also know that some other funders have similar sections. They could read something like, how did the community inform, or how did the community help to shape the idea of the research or the idea of the study? So this is very important because the engagement enables the researchers to assess and improve research relevance, acceptability, and also feasibility. But also, it enables the researchers to assess and improve the relevance of that study on that particular community. You can also improve study design, implementation through the local insights, also local expertise, because when you do that, you improve the ownership of that study. And also you can identify any practical ethical challenge that it's around during that time. And also you can inform your engagement strategy during the implementation. So we, at this point, it's when we try to understand, or we try to ask the important question here, as in, what the important questions to ask during the feeding of that section in the proposal. So here you might want to brainstorm with the colleagues of your own institute or your own team, and to think as in who to engage. It could be different varieties of group, because who to engage differs with the type of research that you're doing or the type of studies that you're doing. And it might be very helpful with the colleagues who are collaborating with you to collaborate and come up with the list of people or list of stakeholders or groups that to engage. It could be health stakeholders, which could be Ministry of Health staff, hospital managers. It could be patient groups, example, HIV support groups, or maybe youth support group. It could be other stakeholders, maybe education officers, school principals, if you're doing a school engagement activity or a school project. It could also be useful to use the existing community advisory boards, because this a wide range of engagement methods you could use, from as simple as meetings or phone calls or focus group discussions or town hall meetings with larger numbers of community. Well, really, this whole depends with what you're trying to achieve. And also, in framing the proposed question and aims, it may be very important to ask the research question or research aims, as in ask, is the research relevant at this community? Is it needed? Is it useful? Also, are there other questions that as researchers can answer to the community? Also, on presenting the proposed methods, procedures, you have to come up with the procedures, you have to identify the risk, you have also to outline the benefits of doing what you're doing at that stage. So which other methods can complement what you're doing? Are they acceptable? What is the feasibility of that method? Will people of that community participate? Also, what is ethical or practical challenge? So all these questions, what community engagement approach to use, they will help you to shape and how to frame the proposed work. So it's also useful to point out any questions or concerns, suggestion, and how these were incorporated into the application. So take time to discuss with the stakeholders why some suggestions have been taken up and why some suggestions have been dropped off. Because when you get the feedback, you will work on some and drop some. So it's important that you make sure that you align with the community or you align with the group of stakeholders that you're working with, so that they know which suggestions were taken forward and which suggestions were dropped and why they were dropped. So on the engagement strategy on supporting the implementation of this, it will depend again on the type of research which is being conducted and also on the desired goal of the engagement. But in general, in the strategy might combine a combination of both wide and deep engagement or wide and deep approaches. So by deep engagement, we mean holding regular meetings with stakeholders and representative groups, like community advisory groups, or to keep the study team aware of any challenge and concern as they rise, and to inform the ongoing research. Also, this might be balanced between the engagement activities and the wider outreach. For example, to raise the community awareness about a certain study, or maybe community awareness about a particular disease. So this can be done through maybe community meetings, could be mass social media posting, and also the deep engagement. The common approach to deep engagement is the community advisory board. So the community advisory board, it comprises a diverse group of people representing the community, and it's broadly meet throughout the research periodically to make sure that they analyze, they evaluate that what you agreed on before, it's what has been implemented throughout the cycle. And this is a long-term relationship which enables the community representative to have a deeper understanding of research. So they are better equipped and to advise researchers on how, for example, to address concerns raised by the community or to make suggestions for improvements to the study. So advisory board, another thing is advisory board, which may take different shapes, really. They're not limited to patient groups. They could also be young persons. So for patient groups, this is where a group of patients with a lived experience of a disease or a health condition can advise on how we can improve the research study. Or maybe the young persons advisory group can be very useful in strengthening the research or improve the ownership of the research, which involves young people and the children. So to complement the deep engagement, an engagement strategy might require a wider component. There's no limit on how this has been done in the past, but activities do range from town hall meetings, from engaging the school children and maybe open days, laboratory visits for school children, radio programs. So these wider types of engagement may have different goals, for example, to raise awareness about the research, to address a community concern or rumors about the research. For example, let's say there is a rumor in the community about treated nets for malaria prevention, that those treated nets might cause maybe A, B, C, D. So you use a radio program to clear the rumors and make the community understand that the treated nets are effective for malaria prevention also. So also for recruiting participants in the studies. It's important to bear in mind that these type of activities require funding, they require skilled staffs, they require venues, they may require other costs like implementing partners cost, which needs to be addressed. So it's very important to put all this into the consideration. So the engagement activities method that you choose or the strategy will depend on the type of research and the type of goal for the engagement. So this needs to be clear from the beginning. What do you want to achieve from this strategy, or what do you want to achieve from this method that you are employing on this engagement activity? So we also have to understand that type of research define the type of method, because every different type of research not all methods are fit for every type of research. So for example, if we start with community-based research, this is you can initiate community advisory board, you can do laboratory open days, you can do town hall or village meetings, you can do surveys and focus group discussion, but it could be different for another study, which is hospital-based clinical trial. This is where you need patient advisory group, radio or TV interviews, or nurses workshop, and it keeps changing or complementing on another study. So if you wanted an engagement activity to incorporate community input into the study design or implementation, you might want to draw on community advisory board again, or a patient advisory group, or you can do you might want to do the regular meetings at the hospital or with the hospital management groups. So it changes really with how shaped your type of research is. So here, I would like to emphasize one thing, that community engagement component, it's not an add-on on the proposal. Community engagement component, it's a core to make sure that this is where the funders or the reviewers will check that this idea has been co-created, or this study proposal has been co-developed. So it's very important to put these components, the community engagement plan, that will be like a roadmap for the work, as in what will happen when. For example, the workshop, the feedback loops, or maybe the recruitment, all those needs to be well identified and well kept, including their timelines. Also, you have to check on stakeholder roles and responsibility, define who does what and how they can contribute. Also here, it's where it's very important to show to the reviewers that through the collaboration, you have had the stakeholders, or they have committed. Let's say if you're doing something regarding mosquito control, it's important that you have the National Malaria Control Program on board. It's important to show that they have been involved and they're on board and they're supporting, and they have committed support. Also, the feedback and learning mechanism show how community and stakeholder input shapes the project decisions, and not just the researchers group have come up to the final shape of the project. So Another thing, it's important to demonstrate meaningful impact, like show the real influence, highlight with example on how the engagement shaped the research design or priority. Also provide evidence of support. Considering my previous example on mosquito control, maybe the National Malaria Program, get the letter of support from that certain stakeholder which is involved in your study, or show a partnership commitment. Also track and report. Describe how engagement outcomes will be monitored and shared, and how the community will be part of it. Okay, so for the conclusion, I mean, to ensure there are several things to consider. To ensure meaningful engagement throughout the research duration, also to define clear goals for each engagement activities. It's very important that the goal that you set at the beginning of the engagement activity is met. And if it's not met, you have to document as in why, what went wrong, why didn't I achieve this goal, and what should I do to make sure that this goal is achieved. Also, to ensure there is an adequate budget, as mentioned previously, that we might require a lot of costing during the engagement activities. So it's important that the budget is adequate. You also have trained staff to implement those activities. And it's also important to document who participates, what questions or concerns, challenges, and suggestions have raised, and what changes have been made to research as a result of community inputs or stakeholder input. But lastly, but not least, it's important to carefully plan feedback loops to ensure communication from community and research to the research team is back to back, and it doesn't break in between. So I guess I haven't spent all of my time, but thank you very much. And there are a lot of very useful resources in the MESH website. Kindly scan the QR codes which are here. They will take you to different resources. We have a low cost and upstream engagement for research funding application. And we also have a practical guide to planning an engagement strategy for your global health research funding application. Also setting up a research advisory or involvement group. Thank you so much, and we will be able to answer some questions if the time allows. Thank you, Katrina, over to you.
Thank you, Sheikha. It is a fascinating topic, and you're getting a ton of really interesting questions in the Q&A. I'm sure, I hope you'll be around to join the Q&A session later, because there are a lot of questions there that I think your insight will be very helpful for, or if you can get in on the Zoom Q&A, that would be helpful too. Okay, in our schedule now, we have time for a 10-minute break, another one. And then when we come back, we will hear from Dr. Anna Sahofen from the Wellcome Trust. Thank you, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you've had a refreshing break. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We have all of the panelists here. No, we don't. We've got one more session to present. I'm so sorry, Anna. Our final presenter is the funder's perspective. Please allow me to introduce Dr. Anna Sullivan. She's the research lead at the Wellcome Trust, focuses on the epidemiology of pathogenic microorganisms and strategies to control infectious diseases. With a background in immunology and molecular microbiology, she specializes in human bacterial pathogens and is dedicated to translating research into practice, fostering global collaboration, and developing effective solutions for the most affected communities. Now, please welcome Anna. Anna, are you able to open your...
Hi, yeah, I'll share.
And then after Anna, we will have our Q&A. Sorry, everybody.
I hope you can hear. Can you hear me okay, and you see this okay? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katrina. So yeah, my name is Anna Sullivan. I am a research lead in the infectious disease team at Wellcome, and today I will tell you a little bit about the funding opportunities at Wellcome. So for those of you who don't know us, Wellcome is a financially and politically independent global charitable organization. Our vision is a healthier future for everyone, and we do this through our mission of supporting science to solve urgent health challenges facing everyone. So we have two major modes for strategy, discovery and solutions. So the discovery mode enables people to ask questions about life, health, and well-being. And as the name suggests, it focuses on basic biology about human health. And we have different teams that are under discovery. Those are Wellcome Collection, Discovery Research, and Wellcome Leap. And later on, I will be talking about the Discovery Research team and their funding opportunities. On the other hand, we have the solutions mode, which is focusing on urgent health challenges where there is funding studies where we can see immediate impact. And the teams that follow and that are under solutions are climate and health, infectious diseases, and mental health. And I sit in the infectious disease team, and I will also talk a little bit later on about the funding opportunities within solutions and infectious disease. So first of all, a little bit about discovery research funding schemes. So discovery research has really simplified their funding modes into three buckets: early career awards, career development awards, and discovery awards. And as the name suggests, the early career awards are for researchers who are ready to develop their research identity. They are at the fairly early stages of their career. They can request salary support and some research up to £400,000 of research expenses. And the studies that early career usually apply for, they normally last about 5 years. Career development awards are for researchers with the potential to be international research leaders. So they can request salaries and all the resources needed for this program of work. And these are usually quite large programs, and they can receive funding for up to 8 years. Discovery awards, on the other hand, are for established researchers and also teams. They are they're investigator-led. They could also be team-led, so that you can actually establish collaborations and apply as a team. They require quite significant resources, and they can also apply for up to 8 years. So what is discovery research looking to support? We support researchers and teams from any disciplines who are wanting to pursue transformative research and ideas to generate significant shifts in understanding about human life, health, and well-being. So this portfolio is actually quite large because we don't know where these new ideas will come from. And so our remit is deliberately broad. So who do we fund? We fund individuals at all career stages, as I just said, but also teams of researchers. And our schemes are open to lead applicants from the UK, Republic of Ireland, and also from low and middle income countries. And applicants from low and middle income countries do not need to partner with researchers in high income countries to be eligible to apply. So that's very important as a question we usually receive. Co-applicants, however, on the application forms can be from anywhere. So at Wellcome, we are recognizing the importance of LMIC-led research, and we have made a commitment to fund more of the LMIC-led research so that our portfolio represents a more wider and global research landscape. We also know that by doing so, we will support a strong and diverse network of global researchers, and we will also ensure that we can achieve a greater impact of our research. And if you scanned your QR code here on the bottom right, you can learn more about the kind of studies that we fund and kind of researchers that we fund in LMICs. So on this email address, fundingandsupport@wellcome.org, you can actually submit questions. There are no robots that read these emails. They're actually people who answer every single question. But we have sort of compiled the most common remit questions, which I will go through now. So a lot of the times we're asked, what does discovery research mean? And it means generating new understandings and new insights into how human life and health works. And studies need to have a clear link to new research potential. Are you mainly interested in laboratory science? No. Research that we fund can be performed in laboratory, can be performed in the office, a clinic, or a field. It can be observational, experimental, or theoretical approaches. Can my research have clinical or policy impact? Yes, you can have a clinical or policy impact, but you do not need to have a clear link to impact. However, if you do, we would be very delighted to hear about it. Can I conduct a clinical trial? Well, at Wellcome, we do not fund large-scale clinical trials where the main aim is to test whether an intervention works. However, sorry, not a Wellcome, in discovery research, they do not fund large-scale clinical trials. However, you can use a trial design if this is the best approach to answer your research question. So you can think about how the approach to take, how best to answer your research question, and if a clinical trial is the best approach, you can use that. So what are some examples from our open mode portfolio? So again, you can scan this QR code here on the top right to sort of learn more about these studies, which is some of the examples are, for example, the study from Alan Kulungi in Uganda, who has received an early career award to sort of understand the genetic risks of depression. Pablo Strobel Matsula from Argentina is using the Career Development Award to understand the differentiation of neurocrest cells. Then we have Adina Mudumu from South Africa, who is using surveillance data to really understand the approaches to HIV care. Then we have a study from Linda Theron, who's using Discovery Awards to understand the risks and resilience of African youth who are net. And then is Jasmine Akhter from Bangladesh, who's using the Early Career Award to use the data from the genomic surveillance to understand malarial drug resistance. So I will quickly run through the application review and assessment process. So depending on which award you apply to, there is a special or actually dedicated assessment process. However, all the assessment process runs fairly similarly for all three types of awards, and you can learn more about that if you scan the QR code at the top. So when you submit an application for either of these awards, your application first undergoes remit and eligibility checks. And if it passes that, then your application goes to the shortlisting committee. So we have one shortlisting committee for the early career awards and one shortlisting committee for the career development awards and for discovery awards. And if your application is shortlisted, then your application is sent for a written expert review. And you as an applicant are invited to attend the interview. And at the interview, you will have the opportunity to present your research for about 10 minutes and then answer questions from the panel. So what are the assessment criteria? So there are 3 buckets of assessment criteria. The research proposal, which it counts towards the 50% of the overall assessment score. The applicant, which counts towards 20 to 25% of the overall assessment score, and the research environment that also counts against 25% of the overall assessment score. So each application is then given a score, and that's how applications are ranked and then are shortlisted and progressed. So we think about the research proposal. The research proposal needs to be bold. As I said, it needs to generate significant shifts in understanding, needs to have a potential to stimulate new and innovative approaches, needs to be creative and of high quality. And we have put some guidance on our web pages, and if you scan this QR code here, you can find this guidance for how to write a grant. For applicant, what we expect from applicant is relevant experience, depending on which award they apply to. They need to have a certain level of independence. They need to have had certain level of contributions to science onto their field. They need to be able to articulate how this award is going to help them in their career development, but also they need to be able to articulate how they have contributed to the career development of others. If a team is applying to the award, there needs to be a rationale why a team approach is necessary to answer this particular research question, rather than a single applicant. And the contributions from each member of the team needs to be well articulated. And the research environment. So what do we mean by research environment? Research environment is the environment that allows the applicants to thrive for the duration of the award. And people thrive in equitable, diverse, and supportive cultures. So as an applicant, you need to say why the environment where you've chosen to do your research is the best for you. And obviously, when we assess the research environment, that is very much context specific. Okay, so I was talking to you about the discovery research up till now, but I'm just going to quickly go through the infectious disease focus area, which sits in the solutions, and our mode of funding is slightly different from discovery research. So who are we? So our vision, our team's vision, is to support, is a world in which the impact of infectious diseases is minimized in the most affected communities. And we do this through mission by supporting science to bring innovative solutions and approaches to combat infectious diseases in these communities. We have 2 main goals in our team. One is the accelerate goal, where we aim to accelerate the discovery and development of impactful product interventions and strategies to combat infectious diseases. And the other goal is understand goal, where we fund studies to understand the causes and risks of infectious diseases, with the aim of supporting the accelerate goal to develop new interventions. So we focus on 2 streams of infectious diseases. So those that are escalating due to environmental change and those that are escalating due to drug resistance. And under environmental change stream, we focus on vector-borne diseases, so schistosomiasis, mosquito-borne viruses, and leishmaniasis. We focus on waterborne diseases, particularly cholera, And we also started focusing on fungi as a new program. And fungi is that program that kind of straddles environmental change and drug resistance infections. Under drug-resistant infections, we are focusing on those pathogens that have the highest burden in LMICs, and a big focus of our portfolio is also tuberculosis. So I've been telling you what we focus on in infectious diseases, and this is kind of briefly captured in this sort of like blue square, but it's also important to understand what we don't fund. So we don't fund infectious diseases that are highly relevant, that are relevant to high income settings. We do not fund implementation research, except when it's related to specific interventions that are in our portfolio. We do not fund pre-translational research or research that doesn't have a direct impact or pathway to impact. We do not fund development of interventions that are not affordable or accessible. And we do not fund diagnostics, except those diagnostics that are specific to our portfolio. So I spoke earlier about the discovery and the 3 open mode schemes. In solutions, we do not have open mode schemes, but instead we have targeted funding calls. So these funding calls require multidisciplinary focus. Quite often we do ask and encourage early career researchers to be part of those teams that apply to these funding calls. We also fund our activities through discretionary awards. These are targeted funding. This is targeted funding for larger teams or consortia. And again, in these larger teams and consortia, we do encourage the participation of early career researchers. It's very important that before you apply to anything, you check eligibility criteria of each scheme that you're applying to. Discovery schemes have their own eligibility criteria. However, the solution schemes have different eligibility criteria. So it's very important that you first check that. Here I've also listed some of the activities that the solutions programs have recently funded. For example, in infectious diseases, we opened a funding call on the understanding dengue and Zika spread. In mental health, they were looking at the target validation for novel mental health drug discovery. And in climate health, they were looking at how to unlock climate action by making health effects of climate change visible. And finally, before I say thank you for listening, I'd just like to mention that Wellcome now is giving researchers, particularly for LMICs, the opportunity to sit on their committees. So applications to apply to observe a Wellcome Funding Advisory Committee will open soon for the 2026 year. And this is a really great opportunity to learn how committees work, but also how committees use the assessment criteria and how different aspects of the applications are considered during this assessment. And so to know when exactly these applications open, please subscribe to our researchers newsletter by typing in this address. So thank you very much for listening. I would really encourage you to sort of get in touch with the funding support at Wellcome if you have any questions about the schemes that we offer. Again, there are people behind those email addresses and they do reply to every single inquiry. Please also sign up to our monthly research newsletters. And thank you very much for having me and for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. There are a lot of questions coming through for you, as you might imagine, in the Q&A. Really quite a lot. I think you're one of our most popular speakers today. The next session for us is actually the live Q&A session. So how we will manage this now is that everyone can see the Q&A in the chat box in Zoom. So if you're in the bottom tray in Zoom, you can click on the Q&A. If you want to read other people's questions, both the open and the answered questions, and you can put a tick, like a thumbs up on those to say which ones you think are most important, and that will help us to select which questions to answer. We do have all of the presenters here, and what we will be doing is selecting some key questions and hoping to start a bit of a panel discussion. If you are a presenter, could you please turn your camera on so that everybody can see the whole panel? Me and Anna, Isabella, hello. Are you still with us, Evelyn? And Sylvie has joined as well. I would like to start with a question for Anna, since you've just been talking. Anna, a number of people have asked the same question, but how does Wellcome define an early career researcher?
Yeah, so this is a question that we get a lot, and we actually have put a guidance on our web pages to sort of like help you to understand that. But essentially, it's really up to you. You know how your career is, how is it progressing. So if you are someone who has just completed a PhD or an equivalent experience, for example, an equivalent 4-year research experience, then you are most eligible for an early career award. But if you're someone who has done that sort of like first steps after PhD and you're ready to establish yourself as an independent researcher, then think about the sort of like career development awards or even discovery awards. So it really depends. It's on a case-by-case basis. And I will share the guidance in the chat. I'll share the link to it.
Thank you for that. Another question that was asked multiple times is, do I have to have publications? And what does my publication record need to be to apply for Wellcome funding?
So we don't have strict criteria on how many publications you need to have. But obviously one of the criteria is that you have contributed to your research field. So how you have contributed, again, this really depends on what you do, what your field is. If this is social science, it would be quite different from, for example, molecular epidemiology. So there are a number of contributions that you can actually list, and publications are not the only thing.
Thank you. Sylvie, we enjoyed your presentation early this morning, so a lot of us watched your video and it was great. I think that you talked a little bit about, when we're putting together our application, about differences between the milestones and things that we deliver and expected outcomes. Are you able to clarify what that meant? So what is a milestone in a research project? What is an outcome and what is a deliverable? These are all sort of words that seem to describe similar things.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it's very early here. I can't put my video on. So I'm not sure if it's in my presentation where I talked about milestones and deliverables and outcomes. But I can talk about it if you'd like. So the way I see a milestone is actually a marker. Some type of a tangible mark that lets you know where you are in terms of where you are, your journey. So I'm taking an example, okay? So let's say that I live in Cameroon and I'm traveling from Douala to Yaoundé. That's 4 hours. And I know that there are, along the way, there are different stops. Like if you get to the first gas station, for example, you have gone through
you should have gone through about 60 kilometers of journey. So, and that should take you about 1 hour. So that's one milestone, the gas station. If, for example, your car is slow for some reason, and you know you're supposed to get to the gas station in 1 hour, but you get there in 90 minutes, then you know that you are actually slow in terms of your journey that is supposed to take you 4 hours. So that's what I consider a milestone, a marker along the way. If it's a project, it could be some type of timeline milestone or financial milestone or even scope milestone. So that's what I would call a milestone, a marker that tells you where you're supposed to be at what time along the journey. Now, in terms of a deliverable, is actually something. Either it's an event or something that is tangible, that it can actually be measured in terms of what you're supposed to accomplish. So, for example, if in your research project you have objectives, and that your objectives is, for example, to enroll 1,000 research participants within 6 months. That's a deliverable. You're supposed to have the 1,000 participants enrolled in your study within 3 months. That's a deliverable, something that can be measured, something that is tangible. Now, in terms of outcome is what you want to see at the end of your project. If, for example, you're saying that your objective is to have come up with the incidence of tuberculosis in children in a particular area, that's your outcome. So at the end of your project, you want to have a number in terms of the incidence of tuberculosis in that area. Is that clear or?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess, can I move on to Shekhar now with the next question? You talked a lot about the importance of community engagement. And one of the things that, I mean, kind of related to what we were just talking about for outcomes and impacts, community engagement is super important for making sure that we do get great outcomes and we do get good impact from the research that we're doing. The research is appropriate. But one of the things that a number of people have been asking about is, how do we fund this? Because you talked about making sure that you've got engagement before you even submit an application. Can you share from your experience how you've managed that?
Thank you so much, Katrina. On my last slide, I had shared one of the QR codes, which Mesh has a resource on how to do the low cost and upstream engagement for research funding applications. So I would urge everyone to go take a look at that resource at Mesh. But also I would like to highlight briefly on how as a researcher can conduct a low cost on upstream engagement. So first, I would say to know the community that you want to work with. Be part of that community. If you're part of that community, that means you can have the inputs of the community at very, I would say, like normal sittings of the community. If we take example of Africa or a coast portion of Africa, they have like these things called baraza in the evening where people would sit and have coffee or something. So in those kind of settings, you can have the inputs without using a dime, but you are engaging with the community. You are giving them your ideas and you are receiving their views. And also, if you're planning to do a hospital-based research, make time to visit the hospital management, explain the idea, and they'll be able to help you. So the whole point here is just to make sure that you are engaging the community without being honest with them, transparency, selling out ideas, and they will answer to you on what you want to know, based on what you want to build on that study. But these inputs are very important, because some of these inputs, if you present them to funders, they will be able to bridge fund for the idea that you want to do to the study, so that you can have a more deeper engagement inputs depending on the type of study or on the type of research that you want to do. But all in all, it's very important that to be part of the community and to be transparent of what we want to do and what do we expect from the community on implementing that study. Thank you.
I'm going to turn my mic back on. I would like to put the next question to anyone who's willing to answer it, really. So just open your mic if you're on the panel and you think you know, or you have some good advice. For someone, this is about career stage, for someone who's really early career, we've got a number of people in the audience who are like maybe doing a master's or still in their PhD. Where do you think, what do you think they should be doing to get started on this track of seeking independent funding from your experience? I'm going to go to you first, Anna.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk from my experience from being a PhD student. And I remember in these really early days, it was really, really tough to actually think about how am I going to become an independent researcher. And probably the best advice that I was given is try to obtain any funding, anything, however small, that there is, even if you just obtain a small amount of money to go to a conference or a small amount of money to sort of like buy, I don't know, an antibody or a little or anything in the lab, whatever it is your money, and it is the money that you have independently procured. So that does count towards independence, and shows your ability to actually be an independent researchers. But I'm sure other panelists have plenty of advice as well.
Yeah. Isabella, what would you advise?
Yeah, mine is similar. As much practice as you can get. So any small grant you can apply for that would augment the current work you're doing is good experience. Yeah, and get your supervisors to just support that process as well, because it's a value for them as well to show that you've supported one of your mentees or students to build their career as well. And it just builds your confidence with the small incremental grants that you get. It builds your confidence and just teaches you the process as well of writing and how to do it. So I totally agree with Anna. Whatever little funding you can apply for, or courses or anything that will help you with your career development at the moment, definitely go for it.
That's great. Sylvie, I wonder if you would be able to talk about, not only for like individuals who are just getting started, I wonder if you've got any experience as well with organizations who are getting started, who maybe your university hasn't done tons of grants before, but they're starting. Do you have any advice for that situation?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hmm?
Okay, great. So for universities that don't have much experience in terms of grants, the first thing that I would do, what I think work, is actually establish a dedicated grant office, and that may be just one person that has experience in administering grants. That makes a big difference because you have this one centralized resource to help individuals that are either looking for grants, writing grants, obtaining grants, administering grants, running grants. So that's where I would start. If you don't have any experience at all in an institution, just establish a grant writing, a grant administration's office.
And in your organization, do you use any particular tools? A number of people have asked for things like what kind of softwares or project management tools do you use for managing the process of these applications?
Yeah, there are many. In terms of it really depends on where you are, because I'm part of various institutions, like institutions that are quite well endowed and those that are not. In terms of project management software, I particularly use Microsoft Project. I've been using it for many, many, many years, and it has come a long way. And the other, it makes sense to also establish like a SharePoint account, so that different individuals anywhere in the world can have access to documents and work together. Those are the tools that are coming to mind right now.
Thank you. Shekhar, one of the questions that came through around community engagement was sometimes people seem to have experienced that the funders don't seem to recognize that the community members need to also receive funding. In your experience with doing community engagement work, have you been able to get funding for your community groups, and how do you position those community stakeholders in the grants themselves? Are they as collaborators? How does it work in terms of sharing funding?
Before I proceed, is Alan in the panelist?
Sorry, Evelyn, no, she's come
No,
through.
Alan Davis.
Check it out. Al was he was with us, but I think he's had to go off to do some tutoring, so he makes his apologies.
Okay, no problem. I'll proceed then. So I haven't applied for the grants as a solo applicant myself. Mostly I've been applying with senior researchers. I'm a master's graduate. And so normally it takes efforts and a lot of explanation to include in the budget or in the document on what you want to do, especially on community engagement. But I would say that nearly the near years, maybe from 5 years back, the narrative has changed very big time from the funders' perspective on community engagement. On earlier years, it was hard. But now funders are the one who is demanding. And I would say in a very simple language that we don't want to do research and shelf the results, because that's what most of the researchers done previously have been going about. The research is done, the results are out, and then they're shelved because the uptake of the community is low or none, zero. So now the funders have identified that gap. Now community engagement has been given an equal importance on the applications. So it's not hard to get the funding for community engagement. As it is, you can even not get the grant if you're not including community engagement, because the narrative has totally changed. Thank you. I hope I've answered the question.
Really powerful answer. Thank you. Anna, would like to ask you to comment on that as well, and on how do you think Wellcome views community engagement and involvement of stakeholders in grants?
Yeah, so depending on which teams are developing studies, for example, in solutions, for example, we have the mental health team, which have lived experience advisors actually as part of their team and take this extremely seriously and develop the studies very sort of with them. In the infectious disease team, we have started implementing this. So we implement, or we always have community engagement as part of development of studies, but we don't have lead experience advisors as part of our team yet. But this is something that we'll shift soon. So yeah, I have to say that we take it very seriously, and we always involve the community. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Other panelists, do you have experience with community engagement and including that in grant budgets and project design?
Maybe, I mean, I'll just briefly add that for the Wellcome ones, there is a section on ensuring you've engaged the community in the study. And I totally agree with Sheha that it really does enrich the application, because when you go on to implement the project, it's so much easier when you've done it earlier, or you've co-created with the community the question and how you'll do the implementation. So ensuring that their voice is heard on the how will be really important. I think those are lessons learned. If you try and do it after the fact, after you've got the money, it's so much harder, and it takes a lot more time for you to start implementing the project. Thanks.
Thank you. I know Evelyn has had trouble joining, so she's not able to be here just yet for the collaboration stuff, but I do want to get to some of the questions that we received around managing equitable collaborations, because it's a really important and interesting topic. So one of the first ones I have here, someone has been asking, well, actually several people asked versions of the same question, which is how do I manage collaborations where maybe I've got the wrong people on my team? How can I make sure that that my collaboration is either not predatory? Someone actually used the term predatory leadership during collaboration, which is where they're collaborating with someone and that person feels like it feels to them like the other person is taking all the credit, and others are saying, well, I've got collaborators, but they're just not doing my bit. I think this is, teamwork is hard always, but so how can we make sure that our collaborators are pulling their weight as well? What does a good collaboration look like? Let's just be specific, like at the grant application stage in your experience. Isabella, do you have any experience that you could share here?
I think so. I think the collaboration shouldn't start when you're writing the grant. Collaboration should be something that has been developed beforehand, and it's all about trusted relationships and synergies between collaborators or between partners. And people you potentially know either from your mentor, your supervisor, or yourself amongst your own peers, ensuring that there's a relationship where both sides feel value and they'll gain a lot from it. Sometimes even if you're sort of feeling that you're junior to the collaborator, then ensuring you still gain value from it. So that could be the experience of writing the grant or doing a particular assay in or engaging the community or whatever your role will be, but ensuring that it's a win-win situation. And that could only happen when you've had this relationship prior to writing the application or prior to thinking about it. Sometimes it's really hard when you come in cold turkey or you've just met the person to start saying, how do we write this grant? If you do, then it means you sort of need some contractual arrangement, which is a bit, I would say, I would say it's a bit superficial. So it's a bit difficult to determine how the journey will go along the way. But it's so much easier when you already you've struck up a rapport and there's a good relationship ongoing for you to have a successful grant. So that's one of that would be my view. However, sometimes you'll get introduced to somebody because your supervisor said this is a really great person to work with. They'll do, they'll grow your career. And that's particularly when you're up and coming. You need your mentor to open that door for you and have that. It could be the big name in the field or just somebody who's well known in that in the area you want to develop. So in that case, again, you take the word of your supervisor who knows that there's some trusted relationship there, I believe. And so for you at the junior level, it's important for you then to just step up and make sure that you're also performing because that door was opened for you by your supervisor. Because for them to open the door, they also think you're capable enough. So ensuring that you express your capability, but you also deliver. So yeah, I think there are sort of those two angles because sometimes you need that not forced, but sort of introduced relationship, and then you've got to make it work. And sometimes when you can, it's so much easier when you've developed that relationship. That's my view. Thanks.
Thank you. Shekhar, Sylvie, do either of you have any other experiences to share?
No, I agree with whatever Isabel has said, but I would also add that the good collaboration first, you have to have a mutual mutual interest on what you're doing. Because I would speak from the aspect of early or mid-career researcher. Sometimes we lose vision on what we want to do because on this side you don't get grant, on this side you don't get the scholarship to pursue PhD. On the other side, it's just you're focusing on just to get to get going on your career, but everything is just like a kind of block. So sometimes you can lose the track on what you really want to do or what your interest is, and that could land you in a collaboration which you feel like it's not impactful to you or it's not of a common interest. But having a mutual, you have to align the ideas or the interest that you have. Is it the same that on the collaboration that you're getting, but also you have to do the equitable contribution. I've seen in one of the comments or one of the questions is that what if a junior scientist gets a collaborator, but the collaborator is doing the minimal work? So that one, I could somehow relate, but also I could talk about it positively because some of the mentors or the supervisors, they're not doing minimal. They just want you to push harder. They want you to do more so that you can grow. So that is also very important. At what limit can you push yourself to make sure that you accelerate on the career and to get where you want to go using the collaboration that you have? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. There can often be a role to play in stepping aside to make space for the early career researchers to fill and grow into. Anna, I know that Wellcome has a lot to say these days around equity and collaborations and equitable partnerships. And I wondered if you could just talk about this a little bit about what, if you were receiving an application, what would you be looking for that would demonstrate to you that this was probably going to be an equitable partnership?
Yeah, so when we receive an application, the roles and responsibilities of everyone applying needs to be stated very clearly, and that's how we that's what we have, and that's how we assess. If they are not stated very clearly, then that's the red flag. Or if, for example, role of someone vastly exceeds, for example. So we take that actually quite seriously when we are discussing application, especially the committee as well. Another thing that it's important to flag is also the, for example, if studies, for example, contain different researchers from different countries, it's important to actually ensure equitable partnership there as well. And this is very clearly, you can sort of see that also from the budget that goes to sort of like the main awarding institutions versus other collaborating institutions. So we look at that quite seriously as well. So we have sort of like various ways of looking at these equitable partnerships. It's also an area that is still evolving at Wellcome. We have recently opened a department at Wellcome just purely for equity. So it's still evolving, but we are sort of take that equity a little bit more into account when we're assessing application for sure.
Thank you. Another theme in the comments was AI. A lot of people have mentioned it. It's all anyone ever wants to talk about when you go to a conference or anything these days, for good reason, because obviously these AI tools are available, they're accessible, and they're good, right? I know we have already linked to Wellcome's guidance around the use of AI in the comments, so you can go and check that out. It's freely available on the website. But I wondered whether we could start a little bit of a discussion among those of us who are here in the panel today. It's not hard and fast guidance, but people's experiences and people's feelings. But one of the questions here, for example, is it okay to use AI or ChatGPT to polish your grant proposal? What do we think? Do any of you guys have a strong opinion, or should I call on you? Sylvie, have you used it?
I do use AI. I use ChatGPT, but I do not use it as a first point of writing, because it's extremely obvious to a trained eye when you have used AI to come up with a piece of writing. It's extremely obvious. And if you use AI, it will be at your own risk because I have seen disasters. This is a robot. It's just a lot of information pieces that are put together. So it may work, it may not work. But somebody who actually has a trained eye, who is an expert, it jumps to the eye that AI was used. So I use it, but I use it sparingly, and I could use it maybe for inspiration, but I would not just cut and paste what comes from ChatGPT into a document, because it shows that it's not original. It's very, very obvious.
I mean, one of the questions that came up was specifically in response to Isabella's presentation. And the question was, I know good writing comes with practice and that reading helps, but how do you know when it's the right time to start writing instead of just reading? And since we're now in the era of AI, how can beginners make sure they use it ethically as they learn to write? What thoughts do you have about that, Isabella?
Let me try and enter this generation of AI. I guess in my mind, when you're writing a proposal, you've gone to read around the topic. Because okay, I've got this particular idea. that I'm thinking about. And for you to determine whether there's a line of question to follow, you'll go and read around the topic. So back in our day, you would go onto PubMed and do the searches and get, all this literature out. Now, I suppose it's much easier. So you could use AI to help you pull out the literature. You could, I suppose, ask AI to summarize it, I think. Never tried it, so I'm just talking, but I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, for you to put forward that compelling argument, you needed to have done the reading, synthesized the literature in accordance to what your line of questioning was or what you've been discussing with your peers to come out with that compelling pitch of what you want to, of the idea you're trying to sell, because the idea is yours. I suppose you could start framing things yourself and then ask AI to try and, sharpen it a bit. But I do agree with Sylvia that, when it comes, you've got to check that it has that human touch to it. And then a lot of the people these days are so primed, those who are reviewing are looking at whether you've actually done the work. So that's why I think there's such a tight balance. And tweaking a couple of sentences maybe, but not the whole document. Because people want to see the face behind the writing, and some of it just comes up in your style. I also know that you can probably give AI a lot of your writing to figure out your style. I've heard. I've not done it myself, but this is what I've heard. So I think there's a place to use it, maybe to help you get, do the literature searches, and then you do the reading, perhaps to help you summarize a few things. But at the end of the day, you still have to go look through it and make sure that the messaging and the thread of the story is all there, and all the compelling pieces are there. So it has its value, but I think the beginning and all the groundwork still has to be the individual, because you're the one who comes up with the research question and not AI. That's my thought, but yeah.
Yeah. Anna, I know Wellcome asks for people to declare their use of AI. And what would be a red flag for you? I mean, obviously a red flag would be if something read like it was written by AI. And as Sylvie says, you can tell sometimes that something's written by AI and it wasn't declared. That's an obvious one. But is there any, just to flip it around, would there ever be a red flag because somebody hadn't consulted AI?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I can't imagine a situation for that. However, we do, as you said, we do ask researchers to declare the use of AI and the application, but they don't have to if, for example, they want to improve the standard of English in the applications. In that way, they don't. And for example, if we see that, for example, the standard of English could be improved in application to make it stronger, that would be a case, for example, actually AI would have helped and it's actually useful for these purposes. So it really depends. So using generative AI to write your application, you need to declare that. But in general, I think it's been said, I would not advise that. It's very obvious when you read that application that it's been written by AI. But if you write yourself the application and you just want to improve the standard of English, then yes, you can.
Yeah. I think there is one place where, in my experience, AI use is helpful, and it's not in writing your application. It's actually in the other hot topic in the questions, which is searching for opportunities. So there is no such thing for free available in the world of a list of all grant applications that I'm aware of all grant opportunities. The thing is this is myself answering the many questions that came in response to my session, which was how do I find opportunities? There's no sort of single list. You do have to be connected. You have to know who is funding research in your specific area of interest. So I'm going to give you my tips for how to find that out. My first one is, because you are reading a lot of research papers, right? They always state who funded the research. And so that's really the best place for you. You figure out who funded that research that was good competitive research that I'm interested in, that I'm citing. That's likely to be a funder that could be relevant for you. So that's your first place to start. The second place to think about from my point of view is who's funding your colleagues, your peers? What kind of opportunities are you seeing other people get in your networks? And these might be small, they might be large. People say, how do I get a small grant or a travel grant? Well, where do you want to go? If you're wanting to go to a particular conference, there might be a travel grant related to that conference. What there's not likely to be is a random travel grant for no particular purpose, because people just don't give money away for that. But one place to search for information, both for information about new grant opportunities that you don't know about, is on AI. So the grants teams, my grants teams, and lots of my grant management colleagues actually use this now to help their researchers find grant opportunities, and they find it better than searching Google or something, or searching in other databases. The AIs have already done the Google search for you, and then they can summarize it. So that's a really good place to look and use that as a tool for looking for opportunities. It's also really good for helping you to decipher some of the dense language in a grants opportunity to determine your eligibility. So this is one other thing that some of our teams do is use the AI software to read the grant call and to read all the accompanying documents and ask very specific questions of it around, would I be eligible in this particular circumstance? And the AI, usually it gets it right. Now you'd want to check and see what it references, but those are actually great ways that you can use AI. It's not coming up with your ideas, it's not writing your proposal for you, but it can be supporting some of those background activities in your proposal. Have any of you guys used it for that? Maybe not yet. Okay. For the final question to go through, I think we should talk a little bit about budgets, because I did get quite a few budget questions. Sorry, just let me look through my document. So one of the things that people asked, one of the questions we got that I thought was very interesting is, how do you balance funders' expectations with the realities of project delivery? So, for example, sometimes the funder thinks that the project can be delivered for a relatively small amount of money, and then in reality, when you're actually running it, it doesn't necessarily go that way. And related to that was another question around, well, how do you communicate about problems? So if something's going wrong in your project, what do you tell the funder? I won't go straight to the funder, but I might come to you at the end, Anna. But Isabella, do you have any thoughts around this?
Start with the problem one. Usually with your grants, you probably have a project manager assigned to you from the funder, and they most of the time check in and how progress, or you're able to give annual progress reports. So I think it's at that point where you can be transparent, especially if there's been delays in starting up your study, like you're in the field and you couldn't access, there was a strike, or I don't know, there was a flood and you couldn't access your field sites or whatever. Yeah, giving that information as early as possible, because that also delays your engagement with the community and how you get started, is a good thing to do, and you use your the person assigned to you from the funders, from the funding organization. So just clear communication is helpful. That can just be an email, or if you do your regular check-ins or in the annual progress report. But it's probably better to do it before the annual progress report, so that you can explain why things have taken much longer than expected, because that generally tends to happen. Then there's the question on the budgets. I guess it depends. If you're writing for a grant and there's a particular cap, on how much you can spend, then that's what it is. So you've got to work your grant to be feasible within that. So we've had experiences where you've put in a grant application and you're told it's ambitious, and you think, oh, I thought I could do that. But it's the feedback you get, and so you just have to work within the constraints of the budget of the grant requirements to make sure that you're successful. And I think the main aim of it as well is to really think about, when you're writing the grant application, what can I do in the particular time period you've been given and the budget you've been given. So it's about probably doing a reality check and being a bit realistic with what you can do with the idea you're thinking about or the proposal that you're putting together. So the constraints do help. Otherwise, as I said, you can be overly ambitious and then not hit your targets. So there's some value to having some constraints. Thanks.
Thank you. Sylvie, do you have any experience with either of these issues, where the funders have expectations that maybe don't feel reasonable to you as a researcher, or the other one?
No, it's okay. I understand your question. It is true that, particularly as African researchers, the funders, especially those that are not familiar with the environment, would not always have an accurate and realistic idea of how things are actually on the field. But unfortunately, they hold the purse strings. So whatever the funder gives you in terms of a money amount, you have to fit into it. That might mean that you may have to reduce your scope of work. So for example, this is just an example. Let's say that they ask you, they give you money to buy a Pinto. I don't know if you guys know what a Pinto is. It's a long time ago, it was a very bad car, like a very small, non-expensive car. But then they're expecting to see a Mercedes. That is not reasonable. And there is no, even if you try to fit into it, you will end up failing. So it's up to you to build your case for using the budget the way that you're seeing it. And that also comes with documentation. So, for example, how much a statistician will cost you in terms of salary on your team, in your environment. So come up with the background information and documentation that shows that, yes, in your environment, this is how much a statistician is paid. They may ask you to do some field work, and you have to take into consideration many of us in Africa don't have our own cars, so you have to take into consideration renting, transportation, and you just bring the documentation, and that backs up the amounts that you put in your budget, and that usually helps. But you have to be realistic. Don't overpromise. There's no point, because in the end, you're building your record as an investigator, meaning that you have to protect your integrity, because that's what will take you a long way. So don't promise things just because you want the funding right now. Remember that you have a long career, and everything that you do follows you.
It's really interesting. Anna, how do you think, from a funder perspective, how should we be communicating challenges with funders?
How should researchers communicate? Yeah. So it's basically what Isabella said. You get assigned someone who looks after your grant, and it's very, very important that you're transparent with them and open. We are not going to take away the funding. If anything, we're going to help. So we heard about challenges from many researchers. We have a lot of, like, our program managers have a lot of experience, and so they can find other solutions or ideas of how to help. And that's why it's very important that when challenges do arise, you do communicate them. So do not, please just do it. In terms of budget, can I just comment on that briefly? I think what is important to understand that also funders, they don't have a bottomless pit of money, and we are also struggling to sort of, like, we have a budget as well, and we're trying to sort of, like, make the most of it, and we do assign a certain cap to the budget. That is because of that, because we're trying to fund a number of studies with that budget that was assigned to us. So we are all constrained. And I do agree with what Isabella said, that constraint is useful because it helps you to focus. We want ambitious projects, but we also want projects that actually focus to ensure that actually you do get somewhere. So it's a healthy balance between the two.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that an infinite amount of money doesn't necessarily produce better research outcomes. That we need the creativity sometimes that being hungry forces us to bring, and that's not a bad thing, not always. Okay, so we're beginning to be out of time, and I would just like to go around the group of the remaining presenters, and for the remaining audience, which I believe is still pretty big. There's 600 people on the call here. What advice do you have? If you could give one take-home message to the people on the call, maybe particularly to those of our early career researchers or who are just starting out doing this for the first time, what advice or words of encouragement do you have? Sylvie, can we start with you?
Oh, no problem. So I'm sorry I could not attend earlier because it's you guys started at 3 a.m. where I am. So I'm sorry about that. And I also heard that the sound on my presentation was not optimal. I apologize for that. So next time I'll know what to do when I'm recording. And thank you for your grace. So in terms of advice, I heard, since I came into the Zoom call, the meeting, I heard somebody talk about the small grants. The biggest advice I have for those early career researchers is do not underestimate the small grants. I call them low-hanging fruits because they are easier to obtain. And one of my first grants was for about 15,000 US dollars. And that 15,000 US dollars, I ended up writing, I think, 2 different articles, and that ended up being like a projector for me. So even if you think, oh, this is a very small amount of money, even if it's $5,000 or 5,000 euros, if you you do a very small research project, but just you can magnify it by the way you disseminate your results, and you make yourself more visible to attract larger grants, and even just to attract collaborations, to attract more seasoned partners. So do not overlook what I call the low-hanging fruits, the smaller grants, because they are easier to obtain and the impact is a lot more than the amount of money.
Thank you. Thank you for getting up in the middle of the night to come and share your wisdom with us today. I think it's really a great privilege to hear from you. Anna, what from your experience as a researcher, as working for a funder, what advice do you have?
Well, similarly, I would say for early career research, do not underestimate what your contribution can bring to a team of researchers, consortia. You are incredibly valuable just because established researchers, for example, would be lead PIs. That doesn't mean that your contributions are any less. So just getting there, don't be shy, don't be afraid, be part of the big teams because it will be very rewarding.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for that insight. Oh, my dog's going nuts. Isabella.
Yeah, thank you. Mine would be just to encourage those who are getting onto the journey at whatever stage, master's, PhD, even early postdocs, to just keep reading. It enriches your writing, and to keep writing as well. I think that's the trick. My own experience was when you keep writing the manuscripts, you keep writing the proposals, and ensuring that you've got a good peer review system, friendly peer review system in-house with your colleagues, or with ensuring you utilize your supervisors and your research community to help you along the way. And the second big piece is keep going. The rejection does come. It's part of the research career journey, but don't let it knock you down. You just dust yourself off and you just keep going. And so just take it as part of the journey, and it's not about you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Isabella. From myself, I would say, I'm not a researcher. I'm an administrator. I've done a little bit of research somehow on the side, and I still continue to, but that's because opportunities show up in life. And I think that my advice for everyone here, particularly those who are starting out and don't necessarily know which way your path is going to take, is think about where you can contribute. It may not be, maybe we all want to get the big grant, we all want to get the big opportunity, but if you're thinking about building your network and building your relationships and building your community, think about what you can contribute to others, because the more that you do, the more that you give, the more that you collaborate with other people, the more it comes back to you, in my experience. And that those who are really successful are also those who are very generous with their time and with their energy and with their ideas. So that's my personal advice. I think we're out of time, so I would like to start to wind up. So today I would like to get feedback from you. We'd appreciate your feedback on today's webinar through the Global Health Network survey. Your input will help us assess how well this event went, how well it met your learning needs, and help us to improve future sessions as well and understand what you've gained. I'd really like to thank all of you in the audience for participating, and that is those of you who are in the Zoom, as well as those who are joining in the live stream on YouTube. There are many, many people joining today, and it's wonderful to be able to talk to all of you. Thank you to our panelists. It has been a great privilege to be able to hear from you and to be able to learn from your experience, and we really appreciate you giving your time and giving your energy to this workshop. There are plans for a second workshop, and that will be a second day on the workshop. It was originally scheduled for tomorrow, but that will be rescheduled for later. We've received many, many comments and questions, way more than I can read, for this session. So we'll gather all of those together and we will ask our panel to respond in writing. The recording of this session, along with additional materials, will be shared, and the link to where you'll be able to find these will be posted in the chat now. So thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to you in the audience for your participation, and we will now close the session. Goodbye, everybody.